Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the first live stream of the new year, so happy new year to you all. It's also the start of a very, I'm excited by it, a new series of live streams going through the rulers of Westeros, starting with Aegon the First, and we'll work our way all the way through to, I think, Robert Baratheon. So I don't know how long that'll take, but it seems like a fun thing for me to do. We'll try and keep this as interactive as we can. I've obviously got some questions from my patrons that I'll try and work my way through, but I'll pick up as many questions as I can in the chat as we are going through. As this is the first of a new year, I thought I'd just give a little bit of a summary of what to expect in 2023 in terms of TV shows. It's going to be quite a quiet year, to be honest. No Rings of Power. There's going to be no House of the Dragon, but what we will have is The Witcher Season 3, which we've been told to expect in the summer of 2023, and also probably Wheel of Time Season 2. I'm expecting spring. We haven't had any confirmation of that, though. By way of other updates, we've had George R. R. Martin has been doing, he's not done his traditional massive update that he normally does in the new year. Maybe that'll be coming soon. But he has said a few things over the Christmas time, one of which was talking about the successor shows, which spin-offs is our language. And this is what he said. He said, some of the successor shows are moving faster than others, as is always the case with development. None have been greenlit yet, though we are hoping, maybe soon. A couple have been shelved, but I would not agree that they are dead. You can take something off the shelf as easily as you can put it on the shelf. All the changes at HBO Max have impacted us, certainly. So this is basically saying we've got House of the Dragon. Obviously, Season 2 is definitely going to be happening. That was a massive success. George R. R. Martin has always been clear that with the other spin-off shows, there are 9, including House of the Dragon, that are being worked up. They're not all going to happen. As they develop, some of them will fall away. A couple of them have, as he said, gone onto the shelf. We don't know which ones, but some of them are quite close. That, I think, is what I would like to be focusing on. So green light soon, maybe. We've been expecting this for a little while. House of the Dragon was a massive hit. Of course, they'll be trying to do some new shows off of the back of that. So we don't know which ones, but expect an announcement maybe this quarter, in the first 3 months of this year. I don't know. But that's where he is at. Yes, he's still working on the Winds of Winter. The updates we had at the end of last year suggest not this year, so don't hold your breath on that one. But maybe next year, maybe the year after, I don't know. It's still a while away. He's 3/4 of the way through, is still the latest update. Other things to say in terms of TV shows, in case you missed them, Andor, this is what I watched over Christmas anyway. Andor, I finished it all the way through. It is excellent. If you've not watched it, it's quite a slow start, but when you get into it, by the time you get up to episode 6, 7, 8, it really starts picking up. So that's one of my shows of the year. It has to be said, actually, House of the Dragon just won a Golden Globe for Drama Series of the Year, which was, I think, unexpected for them, but I think shows how much people like it. The other thing to pick up on, I think, is his Dark Materials. If you are a fan, I'm halfway through the last season, which just got released partway through December, and I'm loving it so far. I think this is possibly the best season so far, in my view. If you like it, keep going. It's looking really good. In terms of updates on House of the Dragon and Rings of Power has been filming since October. So it's not going to happen this year, probably at some point in the first half of 2024. House of the Dragon has not started filming. They are still in pre-production. Ryan Condal is writing it as we speak. We know that they've booked in filming starting in Spain in March, so things will be happening from there. 8 months is what we've been told. The actor of Aemond Targaryen let slip in an interview that there's 8 months filming blocked out for this. So 8 months from there takes us to the end of the year. So expect it perhaps halfway through 2024. I'm hoping we won't get the same clash of the two at the same time, but who knows? The headline is don't expect either in 2023. So that's where we're at. Let's go to the chat. Hi, everyone, by the way, and welcome if you're watching this live or indeed if you're watching this back later. It's fantastic. I took a few weeks off. I'm much refreshed. I've got a lot in store for you on Deep Geek during this year. I'll be talking more about that, maybe not this week, but maybe over the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'll tell you a few of the things I've got planned. But more of the same is the short answer. I'll be focusing on Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, and probably a few other things. So I've started listening to Dune. I don't know whether I'll be doing any stuff on that, but that's it's a great book. I've not read it for a long time, but I'm now listening to the audiobook. So let's see, maybe I'll get onto that one as well. But those are my 3 focuses: Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Witcher. Martin S., thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi, Robert, who do you think has the greater brute physical strength, Cersei or Tyrion? By the way, I doubt either of them is particularly strong, and I'm sure Jaime is the strongest of Tywin's children. Well, yeah, I absolutely agree in terms of Jaime being the strongest. Cersei or Tyrion, I mean, I don't think it's a huge thing, probably about the same. Tyrion, one of the things which George R. R. Martin, I wouldn't say he dropped, but he focused less on the further he went with Tyrion's arc, was the fact that he's quite an acrobat. You see that when he gets introduced early on in Game of Thrones. He's effectively sat up on a roof and then does a jump and a twirl, and he lands in front of Jon Snow. That element of who he is, the physicality, kind of slowly doesn't get written out, but it's played down the further in we go. But he does have that to him. Cersei, we never really hear about her brute strength. She doesn't seem to work out or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a thing that George R. R. Martin would have personally been thinking too much about. But yeah, probably Cersei, just in terms of size. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Happy New Year to you. Saying a big thank you for all the fabulous merch and all the wonderful stories and the well-told tale. Yeah, if you don't know, I do have a second channel, the Well-Told Tale, which is where I do audio narration. If you love classic science fiction and fantasy stories, then please do check out the Well-Told Tale. I'm sure one of the moderators will put a link in the description somewhere. This year, I've got some fantastic stories coming up. We've got, well, I think on the podcast, because I do it both on podcast and YouTube. On the podcast, a couple of things coming up I'm very excited by. The Trial by Kafka I've got coming up soon, and also George Orwell is now in the public domain, so I will not be able to resist 1984. So if you want to hear 1984, just hold on, because that will be happening. Nathan Durham saying, no questions, just wanted to show some love. Such great content and great thoughts from you. Thanks. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. And question from Lisa Dennis, just saying, just sending a small thank you for all your exceptional content. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Lisa. Wing Commander Bogfield just in the chat saying, hi, Robert, do you think Maegor would have been a better person if Aegon had made more of an effort with him? Perhaps. I think the thing... this is the nature versus nurture question, really, but he was from a very young age. When he was just a few years old, he was already killing cats, let's put it bluntly. So I think he was not, and maybe I'll go into this later, but I don't think it was a natural birth. I think there was some magic involved in that, which certainly made him as he was. Could Aegon have been more involved as a father? Almost certainly, I think. And would that have made a difference? Almost certainly again. But would it have changed Maegor? Perhaps not completely. Philip Donald, thank you so much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that. If you want to drop it in the chat, I'll make sure one of the moderators picks it up and lets me know. Uber Mellon saying, if you got to choose an actor to play Aegon the Conqueror, who would you choose? Personally, I would love to see Henry Cavill. Well, this is an interesting one. I get asked the Henry Cavill question quite a few times, actually. My personal take is that I would love to see Henry Cavill be Maegor. It's against his type. I know he's normally the dashing hero, but the physicality of Maegor is huge, big, muscly. Aegon is described as a fighter. He's described as a big man, but not quite overpowering people with his physicality, which is where Maegor is. And I think that would work really well with Henry Cavill. As for Aegon, I mean, I don't know. I would love to let me know in the chat. Do drop a few names down there. I will happily opine on them. I don't have someone in my head for Aegon. This is a real issue in as much as House of the Dragon is going to be an anthology show. If you've not picked up on this, this was something which came out a few months ago. The idea for House of the Dragon is not just to tell the story of the Dance of the Dragons. It's to be an anthology show for the Targaryen dynasty, basically Fire and Blood. Now, what that means is once we finish the Dance of the Dragons, I think they're hinting it's going to be 4 seasons. Once they finish that, they will pick another bit of the Targaryen dynasty. And I think, quite clear favourite for that is Aegon's Conquest, which means we will need to have an Aegon to be cast. So, yeah, I will come back to this in a moment. If you want to, in the chat, give me a few names of who you think would work well for that. Pardon me. Roma Steve saying, Conqueror crabs are an invented species by George R. R. Martin. What symbolism do you think he might be trying to play on, if any, with Aegon? I mean, I have to admit, unless there's a specific thing here, I don't know about the Conqueror crabs, which context that he's used that in. The imagery for Aegon the Conqueror is obviously Fire and Blood and Targaryen-y, but it's also about he is a loner. He is an enigma. He is very much this kind of person that nobody really understood. That's made clear again and again in Fire and Blood, is that yes, he was open with his sisters, but nobody other than them and perhaps Oris Baratheon, his probable half-brother, nobody really understood him. Nobody really knew what drove him. And that is a little bit crab-like. If you're taking this idea of the crab in its shell, nobody can get inside, that is very Aegonish. So if I had to guess, that would be where that's coming from. Aegon, he does use the word enigma. Nobody really understood why. We'll come on to the why of the conquest in a moment because it's a big question. Why he conquered, what he wanted once he conquered, who he was as a person, what made him tick. None of those things. A lot of his successes, we get a lot in Fire and Blood. We understand a lot about Viserys, what made him who he was, Rhaenyra, Jaehaerys, Aegon. It's a mystery still, and that does feel quite crab-like. Question from Maggie DeForest saying, why do you think Maegor waited until his brother died to take over? And how much of an impact do you think his mother had in that decision? So this is an interesting... So I've done a video on Maegor, which is out now. It was part of first of 2 videos on Maegor, which I did jointly with History of Westeros. Check them out. Fantastic channel and podcast. And this was something which came out very strongly for me as we were working on that video. The fact that Maegor, all the way through his father's reign and then through the reign of Aenys, his half-brother, he didn't try and take power. The moment that Aenys died, he came back, literally within the hour. Visenya was riding off to get Maegor and say, come on, we're going to grab the throne. Now, what that tells me is that there was some sort of commitment, or the hint here is that there was some sort of commitment. Maybe Visenya had made a commitment to Aegon that as long as Aenys lived, then Maegor wouldn't try and take the throne, that they would recognize, that they would honor the fact that Aenys was Aegon's named heir. That is the most obvious answer I can see, because the moment that Aenys died, that's when Maegor just swung into action. He didn't care about who was technically next in line after that. He went straight to get the throne from there. So, although it's never said, I think the clear implication is that there was some kind of understanding, a promise maybe, something along those lines, which said that Maegor would not try and take the throne while Aenys was alive. Michael, what are your thoughts on the theory that Aegon wasn't the father of either of his children, making the entire line of succession a mummer's farce from the beginning? 444 over on Patreon asked a similar question. Was Aegon a real father for both of his sons? So this is an interesting one. I did do a video on this if you want the detailed answer a few months ago. There are question marks over both of these. The first over the birth of Aenys, which is Rhaenys's son with Aegon, the firstborn. She spent a lot of time, we're told, with well, not Aegon, let's put it that way. She was his favorite, and when he was around, then she was the person who shared his bed, but he spent a huge amount of his time either on Dragonstone or out on progresses throughout Westeros, and she was back in King's Landing, and she spent time with musicians and poets and playwrights and people like that. And then Aenys, when he arrives, was quite musical, quite poetic, very much of that kind of persuasion. So there were hints, and these come up in Fire and Blood. There were sort of accusations, but nobody ever wanted to come out and say, is that really your son, Aegon? So possibly. My take is probably not. There's no clear evidence that this was actually ever the case. And he certainly looked like a Targaryen. He certainly was a dragon rider. So I don't think that there's a strong case there. There's a possibility. With Visenya having Maegor, she had that child at a time when Aenys was regressing. They lost, so Aenys had lost his mother, and he regressed as a child. I think he was about 3 at the time, and then he was walking, but then he just stopped. He stopped talking. He stopped walking, and he did not look like a strong ruler in waiting. And then suddenly Visenya said, "I'm pregnant with a son." And then everyone went, whoa, okay, so that's good timing. So then Maegor came along. And everything that followed with him does seem to suggest that there's some sort of dark magic hovering over him. But does that mean that he's not Aegon's? No. We don't know exactly how if Visenya did do dark magic, we don't know exactly how that dark magic might have worked. So, as a question, are both of his children his? Instinctively, I say probably, because there's no evidence that they're not, but there are hints, so we can't say 100%, and we will never be able to say 100%. My general take is that whether they were Aegon's or not, they had Targaryen blood. Either way, we know who their mothers were. There was no disputing who their mothers were, so they had Targaryen blood, and they did carry that down. So it's not as if the Targaryen line potentially ended with Aegon. It's just that the line did not carry on through Aegon. The line would have carried on through his sisters. Let's go to a question from... we're having a few, just picking up a few questions or a few suggestions here. Will Poulter says the hero Kolnitsky saying Erling Haaland for Maegor. Yeah, okay, I get that. Os wondering how Benedict Cumberbatch would look like in a silver wig. I think probably not for Aegon, but I do like the idea. Colin Hawkins saying, with the House of the Dragon retcon as Aegon as a prophetic altruist more than a conqueror, why didn't he focus more on the north and expand beyond the wall? So I'm sure I've got some questions coming up on Patreon connected to this, but I'll start it here because I think this is a really interesting question. So, House of the Dragon introduced this idea that Aegon the Conqueror was a dragon dreamer, and one of his dreams was what we call the Song of Ice and Fire. And although this gets passed down from generation to generation, and Viserys is the owner of this, and when he passes on to Rhaenyra, he sort of says it a couple of different ways, and there's a thing also written on the dagger, but it's basically the time will come when a great threat comes from the north. You, as the Targaryen king, have to unite the Seven Kingdoms, and you have to make sure that you're in control. And that's the deal, because, you know, the Targaryens are going to save the world. Now, why didn't he focus more on the north and expand beyond the wall is a really interesting question, because if he conquered Westeros with the idea of making this prophecy or fulfilling this prophecy, doing what the prophecy wants him to do, then you would think that his priority would be the north. And yet it took him 3 decades to get up there. He didn't really ever focus on the north. We don't hear about him throwing lots of cash at the Night's Watch saying, hey, make the wall a bit higher, build a few more barracks, have a whole load more members of the Night's Watch. We don't hear any of that, which is a little bit odd. So the more I think about this, the more I have to come to the conclusion that there was some agreement with Torrhen Stark. Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, the king of winter, Lord of Winterfell, who accepted Aegon as his king and didn't oppose him. So we know that they had a chat, we know they talked, and at the end of which Aegon basically said, okay, you can be my warden of the north, you can be in charge of the north, I'll go and deal with what's going on elsewhere. I cannot, given the fact that he didn't do anything in the north afterwards, I cannot believe that he completely ignored it. He has to have talked to the Starks. So I think some sort of agreement had to have happened. I don't know the details. I'm still working my way through this. I'm sure there might be some kind of hint somewhere in Fire and Blood. The other thing to just touch on here, because this impacts a lot on this, is that although, yes, George R. R. Martin did give the thumbs up to this, this is show canon at the moment rather than book canon. So we do not know the difference. George R. R. Martin has been very clear that the two are different. He wants them to be as close together as possible. But at the moment, we haven't yet had the confirmation in the books. Now, George R. R. Martin has, in supporting this, said basically there's a lot of dragon dreamers and this is tying it all together. So it sort of seems the same, but until we get that actual confirmation of the books, I don't think we have that yet. So why didn't he focus more on the north? The logical conclusion is that he just came to some sort of agreement with Torrhen Stark. Let's go to a question from Ranabir Mitra saying, Happy New Year, Robert. Happy New Year to you too. If Aegon had that dream, how do you think he would have justified taking the decision with Dawn post receiving Rhaenys's bones? GGMU, straight back at you. ETH for the win. So how could he have justified this? Again, I think I've got a question about this later, but we get this long period of Aegon trying to conquer Dawn and failing. A lot of Fire and Blood is covered by this. All three of the Targaryen siblings swoop down over Dawn on their dragons. They burn things. Rhaenys also lands and talks to the Yellow Toad, the ruling princess of Dawn, and basically they cannot get Dawn to submit. That's one point. They send the troops in and turn their backs, and then suddenly all the Dornish arrive and all of the troops, and then it's just, well, what do you do now? Now, eventually, we get the death of Rhaenys, shot down over Dawn, over the Hellholt. And much later, we have this seeming peace offering. We get a letter from Prince Nymal. We do not see what's in it, but we get the letter which leads to peace. After that letter, Aegon accepts peace. And he seems to accept the fact that he's not going to take Dawn. So how does that fit in with this idea that he feels he's got this mandate to conquer all of the Seven Kingdoms? Well, we get one hint here, which is that when he was reading the letter, Aegon grips hold of the Iron Throne so tightly that his hand bleeds. We often hear about the Iron Throne as sort of judging people, judging kings, that it scratches, it cuts kings and queens if they're unworthy. That's a whole different story, but this is the one time when somebody clearly, deliberately hurts themselves on the Iron Throne, as if saying, I am not worthy. And that's what happens here. Aegon makes the decision he is not going to conquer Dawn, and effectively admits by gripping the Iron Throne symbolically, I am not worthy of this. So, in how could he have justified it? I think it's just a pragmatic decision, and I think it's a loving decision, is that he realizes he cannot take Dawn by force. And the only way to do that is through peace, and eventually trust that would work. So I don't think he ever, I suspect that Aegon will have sort of gone to his deathbed feeling that he failed in his own personal mission by not bringing Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms, but feeling that he has to pass this on to his successors so that they can do it. And we see that happen with his successors. One after another, they try to take Dawn. And when it was on the crown in House of the Dragon, incidentally, one of the 7 symbols there was the Dornish symbol, the House Martell symbol. And Aegon gets himself and pronounced the King of Dawn of the Seven Kingdoms. So he thinks that he is the king. It's just hasn't been recognized yet. So that's how I suspect he justified it to himself, to say, well, I am King of Dawn. They just haven't realized it yet, which probably says a lot about his psychology. But if you get yourself crowned the king of the Roinar when you haven't conquered the Roinar, then that's what you're saying. Martin S. Are there any precious metal, gold, platinum, silver, etc. mines on Westeros outside Lannister territory? Yes, there are. It's just that most of them are in the Westlands. So you do get... I can't think of a gold mine outside of the Westlands off the top of my head. But yes, the other things, yes, you do get silver and copper and things like that being able to be mined outside of that. The problem is, though, that not all of the mountainous areas are accessible. So the Mountains of the Moon, one of the other big mountain ranges, which is what cuts off the Vale of Arryn from the rest of Westeros, they've obviously got the mountain clans, the hill clans there. They're not allowing, they wouldn't allow people to come in and just sort of set up mines. Similarly, if you go to the north, there are some mountains in the north of Winterfell on the west coast before you get to the wall. They similarly have got some hill clans there. So a lot of the mountains are quite hard, and the mountains that go around, the red mountains that go around Dawn, these are disputed lands between the Reach and Dawn. So they're constantly being fought over. So the issue is not just where are there these natural resources, it's where are they accessible. Let's go to a question from Amy Smith, saying Septon Bath theorized that Valyrians in Westeros before Andals due to the fortress below the High Tower. Could there be an older or deeper Westerosi connection than even what Daenerys the Dreamer started? Well, so all of this ancient history of Westeros is Mists of Time stuff. George R. R. Martin has been very clear. Anything in the Age of Heroes or before that, we should take as legend. We shouldn't take literally. But we have a few things to go on. Firstly, George R. R. Martin has clarified, yes, at one point dragons were over the whole world. There were dragons over in Westeros as well. Secondly, at the base of the High Tower, there are these... Well, it's a fortress, basically, as a base for the High Tower itself, of fused black stone. Now, we see that one other place that I did a whole video about the black stone, because there are a few different types of fused black stone. Also oily black stone, and these are different things. But the headline here is that the fused black stone that we think we see at the High Tower, no POV characters have ever been there. All we've got is some reports from some maesters, so it's still all quite theoretical. Sounds similar to the Five Forts, which is all the way over to the far east, northeast of Essos, on the far side of ET. Again, no POV characters have ever been there. All we've got is some reports from maesters, so we can't be 100% sure of it. But this is what it feels like, which does add to this idea that there was some kind of connection with the far east of Essos. I think we can probably include Ashai in this, and what we now think of as Old Town, Battle Isle. Now, does that mean that the Valyrians were there? I don't think that necessarily is the case. I think this is probably before the Valyrians. The Valyrian fused blackstone does seem to be roughly the same technology, but with things like the Valyrian roads, this seems to be a different kind of thing, a slightly more, pardon me, a slightly more advanced form of this technology. And the height of this kind of technology seems to be something like Dragonstone, where you can have fused blackstone in specific likenesses of dragons and things like that. But what we see at the base of the high tower and then the five forts, as far as we can tell, is quite big, it's quite blocky, it's fused blackstone as a defensive structure, neither of which seem to be connected with the Valyrian freehold. Now, what that does imply is that Old Town, as the name would imply, is old and has been there for a very long time. And it does seem to have been something of a trading post between Westeros and Essos and the people who were in Essos back in the Dawn Age. So perhaps even this was a trading point between the Children of the Forest and whoever came before the Valyrians. We don't know the details of this, but that's the feel that we've got there. This is really ancient. And House Hightower, George R. Martin has explicitly said recently, House Hightower are the oldest house in Westeros, which is quite something when you think about quite how old some of the other House Stark and some of the other really ancient houses are. House Hightower are the oldest house in Westeros. Utred Snow saying, one thing I've been wondering for a while is why didn't Rhaegar name his kids in the right order and name his first girl Visenya? It's an interesting one. So what seems to have been the case with the Rhaegar, so we're obviously having gone way back into ancient Valyrian history, Targaryen history, we're now right back at the sort of the just before the story of A Song of Ice and Fire. Rhaegar seems to have been trying to recreate the three heads of the dragon. The dragon must have three heads, he says. And he has his son Aegon, and he's got Rhaenys, and it seems that he wants his third child to be Visenya. Why didn't he name them in order? My best guess is that he looked at the mother, and the mother of his firstborn daughter, Elia, was, as far as we can tell, a lovely woman, very quiet, very sensitive, seems to be quite reminiscent of Rhaenys. So he probably expected the daughter from that to be a lot more like her, and so named the daughter accordingly. When he found Lyanna, the context of Lyanna was, in my view, that he discovered her as the Knight of the Laughing Tree, defeating 3 knights. She was a warrior. She was fierce. She was strong. She was a lot more like Visenya. So that was who he thought their child, their daughter, would be. This Visenya-like daughter. So that is, I think, why he went down that route. It was who he thought most resembled each of the original 3 heads of the dragon. Ubermelon saying, considering the first Baratheons were presumably at least half Valyrian, why do you think they didn't, as a house, play this up more? They seem to settle into just being another noble house. So the first Baratheon, honest Baratheon, was strongly rumoured to be Aegon the Conqueror's half-brother. illegitimate, a bastard brother. But so he was, first of all, he was made Hand of the King, my strong right hand. And also, he was made the Lord of Storm's End. So why didn't they play this up more? Well, I think, first of all, and on that first generation, it's like, why do you need to? If everyone thinks that already, you don't need to push this. But they did... I don't know quite how to say it. Out of all the houses other than House Velaryon, they did give the impression of thinking that they were entitled a lot more than anyone else. If you look through those early Baratheons, they were playing the game. They thought that they were entitled to be a part of this inner circle. And when you read Fire and Blood Part 1, it's very clear there are 3 big families. Below the Targaryens, 3 big families. House Velaryon, obviously Valyrian heritage, obviously intermarrying a lot with the Targaryens. House Hightower, the oldest family in Westeros, ruling over the biggest city, with the Maesters, bankrolling the Maesters and the Faith, and House Baratheon. They were the 3rd big and most powerful house. So I think they didn't have to lord it over it. Everybody knew. They didn't have to say anything. And indeed, they did marry in again, just a couple of generations later. So I don't think it's right, personally, I don't think it's right to say that they settled into being just another noble house. I think they saw themselves as being at the top rank, just below the Targaryens, and were okay with that. And as long as everybody else accepted that, then that was fine. Question from... Let's try to find the next... question. Thomas McHugh saying, if you get a chance, can you address how so many Westerosi families acquired Valyrian steel pre-conquest? Seems odd to me. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. In terms of how many there were, I think Tyrion estimated there were 200 Valyrian steel weapons in Westeros. So we've only heard the names of just a few. But how did they paid for it? And this seems to be the thing that you do. If you're a noble house in Westeros, you wish to show that you're noble and great and powerful and wise by having a Valyrian steel sword. So that seems to be what it was. And it was expensive, but not cripplingly so. That's basically what it was. The Lannisters did not get one, not because they couldn't afford it, but because the Valyrians refused to deal with them because of prophecy. Raven's Oath. How evil do you think Visenya is? Also, are there any other Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers you follow religiously? Well, I don't follow religiously, but in terms of other Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers, I would refer you onto the people I've had on this channel. There are some excellent YouTubers out there. I wish I had the time to watch more videos from other people, but I'll name check some people I had on during House of the Dragon off the top of my head. History of Westeros, excellent. Do go and check them out. I think I had the Learned Hands podcast if you want a lawyer's perspective on what goes on in Westeros. Check them out. Joe Magician always has some fantastic perspectives on things. I can't remember who else I had on, but there's a lot of, obviously Alt Shift X is fantastic as well. If I will have forgotten many people, so I just name checked people who I had on this channel. So apologies, I'm not mentioning somebody does not mean that I do not rate them in the slightest. In the chat, please do put down who you think are excellent A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers, and I'll read some names out in a moment. How evil do you think Visenya is? I think evil's probably the wrong way of saying it. My take, the more I read Visenya in the light of this new understanding of Aegon conquering because of this prophecy, I think he shared that with his sister wives. I think they both knew about it. I think Visenya was the one who was really strongly wedded to this. And you see that again and again and again. So when she's there thinking somebody might kill Aegon, I have to try and get protection around him. Let's have a Kingsguard. When they're going, when Aegon says, that's it, let's have peace with Dawn, she's the one who's objecting. She hates this idea. Why? Because they have to take Dawn in order to fulfill the prophecy again and again and again. She's the one holding on to this. So I think that she's absolutely single-mindedly focused on it. The moment she thinks that Aegon's heir is going to be a weak child who cannot possibly govern properly, she magically has a child who is a strong child, Maegor. Everything here works along these lines, that she's not evil, I think is the wrong way of saying it, completely single-minded to the extent of blotting out either other moral considerations. Let's put it that way. Cheryl Harris asking about part 2 of Maegor. Yeah, that's coming out very soon. At some point within the next week. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question. I love it when people do this. Thank you so much, Reflective Rambling, for Thomas McHugh. How many Westerosi families acquired Valyrian steel pre-quite? That was the question I picked up a little moment ago, actually. But thank you for that. Maggie DeForest saying, what's the difference between fused blackstone and inky poly blackstone? Well, I think oily blackstone. So I would refer you to my video on this one for all of the details. But there are 4 different types of blackstone, very broadly mentioned by George R. Martin in The Song of Ice and Fire. The first one is the boring type. It's just cobalt. It's just naturally occurring blackstone. That happens. That there are some castles built of it in Westeros that we read about. Nothing magical special. Then we get fused blackstone, of which there appear to be 2 kinds. The first is what I was talking about with the base of the High Tower and also the 5 forts. This is black fused big, and it seems to be quite old. The second is clearly Valyrian roads. We also get the Dragonstone, and we get the wall around Valence. Now, that appears to be like the fused blackstone, but a technological level greater. It's hugely long-lasting, like that fused blackstone, but allows for a lot more intricate work. So in Valence, there's lots of carvings on it. When you get to Dragonstone, which seems to be one of the most recent things that they did, you can make dragon sculptures and things out of it. So those are the fused blackstones. The oily blackstone, we only get 4 examples of that I can think of. One of which is the Seastone chair. One of which is a shy. One of which is the Isle of Toads, and the 4th has momentarily escaped my mind. But this is ancient, and we don't know all of the details about it. We don't know where it came from. Nobody knows where it came from. But the hints are that it kind of sucks in light. And my guess, I'm not going to go through all of the detail on this. My guess is that this is probably petrified weirwood or something along those lines. So it's clearly described as being different. The fused blackstone is not the same as the oily blackstone. The oily blackstone only appears in a very few small places. Cheryl Harris, welcome to the Members Club. Marlon Yamzon saying, hi Robert, great content as always, thank you. Great to be able to catch a live stream for once. I've been on Fire and Blood kick as of late, so keep up the good work. Well, thank you. I'm working through, this is the idea of this series, is I'll work through the rulers of Westeros, and I don't just mean the king. So I think next week I will probably do Rhaenys and Visenya, who were ruling, they were co-ruling. We talk about Aegon as being the king, but they sat on the Iron Throne more than he did. He went off and did a whole load. He was on Dragonstar and he went off, did his progresses. They were ruling in his absence most of the time. Can you talk about Aegon's deeds before leaving Dragonstone? Maybe Aegon previously tried meeting with kings in Westeros to form alliances, but they dismissed him, so he had to bring Fire and Blood. And that's Sam Clontz the second. So, yeah, I can do. He was 27 when they invaded, so he had a life before that, but not decades of adult life. Now, what do we know? Not huge amounts is the short answer. He does, however, seem to have visited Westeros a few times. We know that he went down to the Arbor. He visited a couple of other places, and he also had the painted table built. So he was thinking, he was looking westwards in a way that his predecessors, his ancestors, had not. Now, what his deeds were, I think deeds is probably the wrong word for it. He married twice. He claimed and rode Balerion the Black Dread, which was the biggest and oldest and most terrible dragon there. And that's about all that we know. In terms of whether he might have tried to form alliances, but they dismissed him, there's no real hint of that, to be honest. There's nothing there that says that he tried some diplomatic route to be king. It seems that he gained an interest in Westeros, explored it a little bit, then got his painted table, which is very clearly that I'm thinking about invading. Then came the circumstances that gave him a reason, casus belli, to actually invade. And his first stance was, I'm now the king of the Seven Kingdoms, and you have to bend the knee or you'll die. There was no happy negotiation beforehand. There was no, maybe I'll try and get this bit of land here, then that bit of land. No, it was just the moment he decided to do it, he was all in. So no meetings with kings to try and do sort of behind closed doors deals. Russ Gould, one thing I've never understood about Old Town is that it's a trading hub between Westeros and Essos, but it's on the west coast. Why is that? Well, I think geographically speaking, I completely understand where you're from. It's sort of what the southwest corner. But if you imagine, this is how I've always thought of it anyway, if you imagine who were the trading powers, if we're trying to work out who might trade, then we know Ashai is very old, we know Karth is very old, Valantis, they're all on the south coast of Essos. There's no north coast mega powers from early on that seem to be great trading powers. They're all south coast. Braavos didn't come up until later. So if they are going to trade with Westeros, where are they going to go? They're going to go west. They're going to head across the bottom of the narrow sea. They're not going to head up because you've got, first of all, you had the land bridge there preventing access into the narrow sea. And then when that was gone, the stepstones, which have always been the home to pirates, it's been a treacherous place to go. So if you wish to ensure the safety of your trading ships, you would just carry on sailing west. Where is the first place that you find if you sail west along the south coast of Westeros? You get Dawn, and you have to sail past a lot of Dawn, but most of Dawn is quite sandy. So that's not where people would be. People would be in the Reach. Now, the Reach is the most fertile part of Westeros. It's the area where most things grow. It's the area where naturally civilizations would grow. So the entry point to the Reach is the Honeywine River, which empties out to Old Town. So basically, the geopolitical reason why Old Town was a trading point was it is the first point at which you could get access into the bit of Westeros where people lived, not the desert bit. And you could carry on going further around and get to other places, but that was the first point at which you go. It's not the closest bit of Westeros to Essos, but it's the place where you would get the best price if you're a trader. Question from J. Lord saying House Baratheon and House Stark seemed ironically to historically to have been among the most loyal vassals of the Targaryens. Yes. Ironically, in terms of what would happen at the end, House Stark, for most of the 300 years or so of the Targaryen rule, House Stark were basically left to their own devices. The Targaryens didn't really pay much attention. Yes, Charis and Alicent paid some visits to the north, but most of the time the Targaryens didn't really care about the north. So the Starks could remain loyal, but it wasn't significantly important to them. The Baratheons were, but it was who their loyalty was to, which Targaryen they were loyal to was the issue. It's more the who wasn't loyal. The Greyjoys, they never really wanted to. They saw themselves as completely different. They were off the coast, obviously, then, and so they were not loyal. The Martells obviously didn't join the Seven Kingdoms for a huge amount of time. And then you get the other people who just got a slightly higher view of themselves, like the Lannisters. So, yes, they were loyal all the way through. I don't whether they were the most loyal, I'm not 100% sure. Just quickly flicking through, I asked people to say other channels to check out. History of Westeros. Sir Hunt says Wex is a secret target. I had Mark on here. And Joe the Magician is excellent. Aziz is the best, says Kolnitsky. Radio Westeros. I did, yes, absolutely. I had Lady Gwyn on. Radio Westeros is excellent. I would highly recommend them. Glidus, I don't know very well, actually. I have to admit, I'll go and check them out. Preston Jacobs has been around for an awful long time. Grey Area, absolutely. Alt Shift X, that's Alt Shift X's naughty younger brother, who definitely shouldn't be encouraged in any way, shape, or form. David Lightbringer, Disputed Lands, if she's still making videos. Yeah, I think Amanda I don't think she's made one for a while, but when she does, they are always excellent. Quinn is great, says Connor Gormley. I don't think Quinn's done any of Song of Ice and Fire videos for a long time, but he's certainly excellent on June. Just flicking through. Hills Alive is a great newish channel too. I'm learning here as well. Thanks guys. There's 2 new channels for me to check out. And Mellon Heads that's a Lord of the Rings channel, which is excellent. And I think that's it for the recommendations for other channels. So there you go. There's a lot of people to go and check out. Martin S. Saying, I would like to say I'm impressed you are so knowledgeable about 3 franchises. Thank you very much, Lord of the Rings, The Song of Ice and Fire, and The Witcher. As a contrast, I know the first decently, significantly less about the second, and even less about the third. Yeah, I mean, it takes time to get a lot of knowledge about these things, but thank you very much. That's very kind. One angry pagan saying, I know we aren't really supposed to know about why the doom happened, but I'd love to hear your speculation. Well, I have a video explaining exactly why I think the doom happened, but one thing I would draw your attention to, which I think it was in one of the last live streams I did before Christmas, somebody pointed out something that I hadn't noticed in the History of Westeros interview with George R. R. Martin. They did a fantastic hour-long interview with him, asked him a lot of really good questions. The main thing to come out of that, which I've always focused on, is he explained, I think for the first time in real detail, how he views canon in terms of the books and the shows and things like that. But one other thing which came up, which he moved on quickly before elaborating on it, was they were talking about magical accidents. And he said, yeah, and then you get magical accidents like the Doom of Valyria. And then he went on and talked about something else. Like, well, hang on a moment. I just want to rewind you there, George. Was that him saying that it was just an accident? Because all of our conspiracy theories would just sort of go up in smoke then, quite literally. I don't think that's what he was implying. Ashaya did come in then sort of saying, yeah, lots of people have speculated the Faceless Men are involved, and George R. Martin basically said, I love it when people have lots of different theories about my work, which was an answer to be expected, but didn't really help us all that much. So if you're theorizing about that, about what happened with the Doom of Valyria, do not forget the fact that one of the few things that George R. Martin has said on record about it was to talk about it as an accident. Whether that was a forced accident or a genuine accident, I think is a different matter. My take, I would refer you onto my video for the full details of this, but my take is that the Faceless Men certainly claim credit for it. The volcanoes, which were basically, as far as we can tell, the Valyrian Peninsula was home to some volcanoes, and fire magicians were keeping those volcanoes at bay. So the doom itself, on a very practical level, was caused by those fire magicians not doing their jobs. What caused them not to do their jobs? Perhaps the Faceless Men killed them. Exactly who hired the Faceless Men to do that is a different matter entirely. But my speculation is fundamentally who wanted Valyria and the magic of Valyria to be gone. Who is it who has been consistently against the magic in the world of Ice and Fire? The Maesters. But as I said, I've got a whole video on that one. Raven's Oath saying, my headcanon is that the difference between the black stones, or the types of black stone, is that they are all the same, but have individually gone through different phases or world-altering changes. Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea. Carl Karsnark saying, the creepy, oily stone is a definite nod to Lovecraft and horrors from the Nether Realms, which have landed on Earth and become bad, spooky, but powerful places. Yeah, I think there's definitely is an element of that, the Lovecraftian nod. George R. Martin has done this a few times. He recognizes the Lovecraftian inheritance in high fantasy, and so oily black stone, perhaps coming from the heavens, does sound very Lovecraftian. AK Channel TV saying, "Hi Robert, was Aegon a good father? His 2 children nearly tore the realm apart. Also, did Visenya hate Rhaenys? Maybe it came from the mums." So, in terms of did Visenya hate Rhaenys, I never got that impression. Just reading from Fire and Blood, nobody could separate them, really. So, and when Rhaenys was killed, Visenya was the person who was most angry. So I don't get the impression that she hated her in any way, shape, or form. I think that she was concerned about Rhaenys' child, that Aenys would not be good enough to be ruling the Seven Kingdoms, to be delivering on the prophecy. But I don't think that's the same as hating Rhaenys. I think that actually the 3 of them cared about each other hugely, and they were the 3 who understood what was going on. I think that they worked in lockstep. So I don't think that was there. Was he a good father is a more complicated question. I think he wasn't as involved as perhaps we might have wanted him to. I think the short answer is no. I mean, I'm trying to justify it with saying anything other than that. I think the short answer is no. He wasn't. He was an absent father for most of the time. He was not in King's Landing. He was not with them most of the time that they were growing up. So I don't think that he was a good father. But he wasn't a terrible father. He seems to have been strong but fair with his children. And I think that he, although we don't read it, he had a very clear line who his heir was. And I think that was, rather than in the standards of the time, rather than sort of like vacillating, just simply saying, no, this person's my heir, was a strong stance. Let's go to a question from Martin S. I had somebody was also just said Order of the Green Hand for other channels. Yep, they are. I've had them on here 2 or 3 times, actually, quite a long time ago. And for my people saying Amanda is back. Excellent news. I'm delighted. So do go and check out Disputed Lands. Martin S. saying, from the show, I get the impression that a reason for Ned Stark's lack of political skill is the remoteness of Winterfell from King's Landing. Is that reasonable, aside from his 2 great honor for King's Landing? Yes, so absolutely. The Starks historically had not been involved in the south of Westeros. That's just it's a matter of geography. They would have had to make an active decision to go down south. It took a huge amount of time. His father did make an active decision to start engaging in the south. He fostered Ned, obviously, with Jon Arryn. So Ned wasn't just this kid who was always just up in the north and didn't understand anything about how the south worked. But at the same time, he hadn't grown up in King's Landing. He didn't know how the big city worked. When he was up in Winterfell, people respected him, people did what he said, and there was a shared culture that was not there down in King's Landing. So is it because of Winterfell's distance? Partly, yeah. If they were one of the families near to King's Landing, then they would have grown up and mixed with those people and understood a lot more how the game was played, but they weren't. It's definitely, geography is definitely a part of it, and it's something that we don't, in our modern world we don't think about so much, but this was to go to King's Landing was basically to say, well, I'm going to spend a year doing this. It was 3 months down there, 3 months up, and you have to stay for a while to make it worth it. Andrew K saying post-conquest Aegon wasn't overly involved in that much. In particular, it seems left a lot of the heavy lifting administratively and paternally to the sister wives. Yeah, absolutely. He spent a lot of time. So in sort of defense of Aegon, he spent a lot of time trying to bind together the Seven Kingdoms in a series of progresses. So his thinking seems to have been, I've conquered them. They're scared of me, but I need to bind together these Seven Kingdoms. And the only way that that's going to work is if they meet me and see me personally. So he spent his time going out. Half of every year he spent on the road, meeting the nobles in the different parts of the Seven Kingdoms, trying to build that bond of trust, trying to build that faith in him. So that was what his plan was. And it sort of worked for as long as his reign lasted. The one thing I would probably hold against him, they don't say this in Fire and Blood, but it becomes real, he did not tackle the Faith of the Seven. He never managed to deal with the inherent tension between his own family's ethics, culture, and the Faith of the Seven, which was across almost all of the Seven Kingdoms, obviously not the North, but the simple way that they lived was anathema to the faith. Okay, let's go to a question from Anne Clow saying, hi, Robert. Hope your winter break was restful. It was. Thank you very much. I wonder what the Targaryens were doing from the time they arrived on Dragonstone until the conquest. Do we have any clues from the text? Do you have any theories? How long do you think the Targaryen three waited between the Dream of Ice and Fire and the invasion? Well, a lot of really interesting questions that we don't have huge amounts of answer to. In terms of what they were doing between moving to Dragonstone and the invasion, we've got four generations. The first generation, I think we can kind of forgive. They escaped the doom. What they were doing was setting up a new life on Dragonstone. So let's not worry too much about that. The fourth generation, we have Aegon and his sisters. They invaded. It's the middle generations that are the fascinating ones for them, because they seem to have not wanted to expand. They had the only dragons left in the world. They could have taken over any part of the world that they wanted, and yet they stayed on Dragonstone, and we're not told good reasons for that. Is it simply a matter of the character of those people, that they just wanted to live a happy life on Dragonstone, in which case, fair enough, that's not a problem if they just happily lived there? Was it some echo of the old Valyrian fear of Westeros? Because there was a fear of Westeros. There were prophecies about Westeros, particularly Lannister gold, that would cause the downfall. Was that kind of hanging over, that they didn't want to go any further west? But at the same time, they didn't want to go back where they came, so they were kind of like in paralysis. I think that's very possible to me. In terms of Aegon, I don't get the impression that there was a huge amount of time between Aegon becoming the head of his family, his father dying, and the conquest. Maybe a few years. That's pretty much all. How long? When exactly did he get his dream? My best guess is somewhere just before that, when he then took his mind, before he gets the painted table, he's starting to think about, how do I take over the Seven Kingdoms? And he's just looking for a reason to invade. So I don't think there was a hugely long gap. As I say, he was 27 when they invaded, so it's not like he wasn't waiting decades. But a few years is the most likely. Raven's Oath saying, even with all the diluting, Targaryens can still bond with dragons centuries later. How thin can Valyrian blood get and still wield the magic or heritage? Maura Ferreira, hi, first time watching. Great to see you. How thin can Valyrian blood? So this is I sigh because it's quite a hard one to sort of conceptualize. I don't think that there is a clear answer to this one. George R. Martin has been very clear that if you look at someone like Daenerys, who we hold up as being, she's Targaryen, about as Targaryen as you get. She is at most, if you go back through the family tree, at most 1/8 pure Valyrian, because they married into Blackwoods, the Arryns, and whatever. If you go back through the line, all before that, the Bartells, there are lots of different families who married in, and she is the result of all of that, and she is at most 1/8 Valyrian. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that you can just have a very small amount of Valyrian blood and still bond with the dragon? Yes, that appears to be the case. That certainly seemed to be the case with the dragon seeds, who were at least one level down from being pure Valyrian. But one thing we have to keep on coming back to is George R. R. Martin repeatedly says that he doesn't want to explain the magic. He likes the idea that this is a slight mystery. Clearly, in his world, there is something to do with the line that is important in terms of magical inheritance, the line of succession, which passes down with the Starks, it passes down with the Targaryens. There's something magical about that line of succession. King's blood is very powerful. So, is it just about, are you Valyrian enough? No. But that does play a part in it. And the part is a little bit vague because George R. R. Martin wants it to be a little bit vague. Let's go to Maura Lee, who actually just, thank you, Maura. You did a super chat before we went on air. Actually, I didn't read it out earlier, saying, welcome back, Robert. Thank you. Here is wishing you and everyone in the chat a very happy new year for 2023. Hugs and love to Dan, your gorgeous dog. Thank you. He's not here at the moment, but thank you very much. You asked what role prophecy played in Aegon's conquest and why they wanted to conquer all of Westeros. I think I've covered that one already in the questions. 444 saying, do you think Aegon had some sort of agreement with Torrhen Stark to watch in the north at any sign of the Great Darkness? Yeah. So I said I thought I had a question on one of my patrons on this, so I'll pick up on this again. I did talk about this a little bit earlier, but the way that this happened, the meeting happened, was you get the Targaryen invasion. They've done Harrenhal. They've done Harrenhal. They melted the biggest castle in the land. There was the Field of Fire, where two of the biggest armies of the land came together and got completely wiped out by the Targaryens, the dragons. And the Starks and the Northmen came down south to meet the Targaryens, and the three Targaryen dragons were circling overhead while they were like waiting, and they had this series of messages and meetings before finally Aegon and Torrhen Stark met, and Torrhen Stark knelt and he bent the knee. Now, the plain text reading of all of that is quite clearly that Torrhen Stark realized, you know what, those dragons destroyed two armies, they melted Harrenhal. All they have to do from up there, yeah, I can try and fire some arrows at them, but all they have to just breathe flame down on it and we're dead. And that is the pure, pragmatic, simple, obvious reason why he bent the knee. There is the potential, though, And given everything that I said earlier, it now seems to me reasonably likely that they at least discussed this. Aegon, having come in, invaded Westeros because he has this prophecy about an attack from the north, will have said something like, I want you to stay in place as long as you protect not just the north, the entire Seven Kingdoms against a threat from the north, at which point Torrance Stark would probably like, well, yeah, okay, that's what we do anyway. We've got the wall that we help support and things. Even if Aegon didn't tell him exactly about the prophecy, there will have been some agreement that the Starks are in charge of protecting the north. Warden of the North. That's what they're there. And actually, that's one of the things I do need to go and double check back on, whether that title, Warden of the North, came up for the Starks, or whether he came up with Wardens of the East, West, and South first. I do have to double check that one, because if it was Warden of the North invented first, then that is another indication that he was there thinking the Starks, this is the Starks role. Now, that doesn't, as I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were talking about Aegon's prophecy, about the Song of Ice and Fire. They don't have to have actually talked about that. All they have to have done is come to an understanding that the Starks are defending not just themselves, but the entirety of Westeros. And if Aegon accepted and believed that, then he could leave the North alone. Morally actually asking about the Wardens of the North, South, East, and West, and which houses they were. So these have been pretty much the same all the way through the Targaryen rule. There were the Warden of the North was always House Stark. The Warden of the West was House Lannister. Warden of the South, House Tyrell. Warden of the East was House Arryn. And the idea was that if there came an attack from one of those sides, then that person would be in charge of leading the forces defending Westeros against attack. Now, in A Song of Ice and Fire, briefly, we get Tywin Lannister says Jaime is now Warden of the East, as a sort of a power play, really. But that doesn't last for very long. But other than that, those houses have all stayed Warden of the North, South, East, and West. It's sort of an honorific for most of them. The Lannisters are leading in terms of the attacks from the Ironborn, but there's nothing further west there that's ever come and attacked Westeros. And when it gets big, then the king himself comes out and deals with it. To the north, yeah, everyone leaves it to the Starks. To the east, it's a little bit unfair to leave it to House Arryn, but if there is a major invasion again, then the Targaryens, the rulers, would get involved. So it's broadly an honorific, more than anything else. Let's go to a question from Catherine Furseth, saying, I was wondering about Aegon's leadership style, specifically how he acted and dealt with his wardens of different realms, the Lords Paramount. Did he meddle a lot and micromanage, or were they fairly autonomous as long as they were loyal and bent the knee? What does this choice of leadership style tell us about his priorities and focus as king? So the word I used earlier, and this is not my word, this is the word that we get in Fire and Blood, is enigma. Nobody understood Aegon. In terms of his leadership style, he seems to be quite a curious mix. He's very hands-on when there's something that he personally needs to happen. The invasion. He will personally go out and do it. He personally went and confronted Howland the Back. He personally spoke to Torrance Stark. he will take the lead on these things. But on the day-to-day stuff, I think it was Andrew K in the chat was saying he delegated a lot of that to his sisters. He spent a lot of his time either in Dragonstone or out on these progresses. More than half the year, his sisters were actively ruling. And whereas, yes, he would sort of come up with the big decisions, they were the people who were judging on a moment-by-moment basis. And although, yes, he went and did all these progresses, the clear implication is that he's basically said to the ruling houses, just carry on as you were. He set up a way that obviously the feudal system, money sort of works its way up from the people who are generating the income and goods all the way to the top, the ruling lords. And he basically put himself at the very top of that pyramid, so the money would start funneling up to him and the Targaryens. But apart from that, he sort of left people to get on with it. He didn't spend as much time as someone like Charis did in trying to bring the different statute books together. Now, this is where Learned Hand's podcast would really come in useful, because although it's quite a nerdy and quite a boring part of nation building, it's a hugely important one. If you what sort of different laws do you have in different parts of the world? Do you have a country where all the laws are generated from the center, and so the same law is exactly the same everywhere? Or do you have a system where the laws are slightly different in different parts, and there are just some overarching rules for the whole land? Where is that balance? Aegon seems to head more towards this kind of more federalist style, where you get everybody's got their own rules of how things work, and as long as they all recognize who the head honcho king is, then everyone's cool. Jaehaerys tended to be more towards this centralist perspective, where he tried to codify all of the laws in the land, and when there were some things in one part of the world that he didn't particularly like, or where Alicent didn't particularly like, the right of the Lord's right to the first night and things like that, that was the kind of thing he said, okay, the rule of the whole land is now this. The law across the whole land is here. So they were slightly different ruling styles, the two of them. His two sons didn't really live long enough for us to be able to gauge where they stood on that kind of spectrum. But yeah, I would say leadership style, he delegated a lot. He was happy for a more federalist approach, but when something needed to happen, he was in charge. So he was more the kind of strategic person who would only step in when he was there. If you're after a Myers-Briggs, I've always thought of him as being more of a kind of an INTJ kind of character. An enigma, people don't necessarily know what he's about. He's definitely a thinking person. But he's a man of action when he needs to be. But when he doesn't need to be, he's very happy for other people to be dealing with it. A reflective rambling, picking up for Skedu Rita, saying, who do you think had the greater culture shocks on contact and after later integration, the Targaryens or the native Westerosi? The greater culture shock. Interesting. So if you're talking about the meeting between the Targaryens, when the Targaryens came in, between them and the Westerosi, who had the greater culture shock out of the two of them from that meeting, the first thing I would say is that a lot of what we read about in the histories in A Song of Ice and Fire, Fire and Blood, is the story of the 1%. We need to never get that out of our minds. George R. Martin doesn't want us to get that out of our minds. The vast majority of people just got on with their lives. It didn't actually matter to them who was in charge. The only difference to most people when the Targaryens took over was the fact that maybe there would be a dragon above them who might burn them. But that's the only real difference. They probably didn't really care who their ruling lord was. And I think when you get to places like, say, the north, they never really saw the Targaryens, so there wasn't a culture shock there going on. As for the Targaryens, was there a culture shock for them? The impression I've always got is that for the majority of them, they didn't... to say they didn't respect the Westerosi culture enough is probably the wrong way of saying it. They had such a strong idea of their own culture, of who they were, of their what they saw as their right to rule, that it didn't really matter so much what the Westerosi culture was like. So I don't think most Targaryens had that much of a culture shock. I don't think Aegon had what we would think of as a culture shock. I think that he studied Westeros. This is the suggestion that we have, is that he visited Westeros a few times before the invasion. I think he studied Westeros, he understood it, and then he invaded. And during that period of time when he was studying it and understanding it, he tried to adopt a few things to allow them to fit in a bit better. So one of those is by having a sigil, the three-headed dragon. They never had that before. That was a completely new thing for the invasion. They decided, Aegon said, right, well, we need to have a flag. Everybody else has got this sigil. We need to have one. That was new for the Targaryens. That wasn't a Valyrian thing at all. The house words, the need to adapt to the faith of the Seven was clearly something that he understood. That this wasn't his faith. He wasn't a pious person in any way. The Targaryens, certainly, the first couple of generations, seem to have kept to their original gods as much as they could, their original practices. But Aegon very much understood that he needed to deal with the faith. So he made sure that he was crowned by the High Septon. He made sure that the faith of the Seven was the official faith of the Seven Kingdoms under him, because he understood the culture. So I think it wasn't so much of a culture shock. I think it's an understanding of what he needed to do. Martin S. saying, what real European location what real European location has a climate similar to Winterfell? Central Northern Scandinavia. Same question for King's Landing. Is it Rome? Well, I mean, the short answer is there isn't one, because of the differences in the seasons and things like that. So Winterfell has long periods of intense snow, and then long periods of it's still a bit cold, but not winter. So there's no exact match there. When you sort of map it onto if you've never done this before, then very, very roughly you've got a map of England and Ireland sort of squashed together to make Westeros. But if you kind of map that across, then the map puts it to something like York, Lancaster, that kind of northern English way. So a little bit south of where Hadrian's Wall is, if you know your English geography. But clearly it's colder than that. Yes, somewhere in Scandinavia is probably the closest you would get, somewhere where it is snowbound for long periods of time. In terms of King's Landing is, again, if we just use the sort of the raw map of Westeros, then it's London, and that's the idea. So it's not that hot there, but it is definitely warmer than the north, and probably warmer than London is in reality most of the time. So again, there's not an exact analog, but because the seasons are so varied, King's Landing, we think of it as being quite a warm place, but when it gets to winter, when there's a bad winter, you get icicles hanging off of the Red Keep. It gets very cold. The ice, sometimes the black water freezes over. So it's not, I mean, there are any Italians watching, then feel free to contradict me. I've never been in Rome in the winter, but I don't think that having the Tiber freezes over all that often. Let's put it that way. Let's go with a question from T. Adams. They're saying there are numerous prophecies concerning the kings and queens in A Song of Ice and Fire. What is the source of these prophecies? Dragon dreams, visions in the House of the Undying, Azor Ahai, Maggie the Frog, etc. As you stated, people's reactions to the prophecies are more important than whether or not they're true. However, some of the prophecies in A Song of Ice and Fire have objectively come true. Do you think that's because they genuinely come from a higher power that knows the future? If so, is there one higher power, or do you think various gods each have their own individual capacity to know the future? Okay, so the boring answer is George R. Martin has been very clear. We not only will never see the gods in A Song of Ice and Fire, we will never get confirmation if the gods exist. So is there some sort of higher power? There is certainly magic, and there seems to be an overarching magicalness to the world, let's put it that way, which people tap into in different ways. Now, if it's all the same, it's not clear. George R. Martin has not got a very rigid sort of Brandon Sanderson style clear magic system. He likes to keep it nice and vague. What's the source of all this magic? Again, it's not made clear. We know that when you get more magical beings, then some magics get easier. So you get the dragons existing, allows for more magic to happen. But what's the source of it? George R. Martin, I think, would say this is a magical world. There's just magic there. There's just magic around. I don't think that the answer to all of this is there is one single source of magic, whereas one god from whom magic flows. I think he would say that the world itself is magical, and people tap into this in different ways. Curtis Frank saying the higher power is George. Yeah, I think that's probably fair. So Wesley Mons would talk a little bit about the geography here. Wesley Mons saying Westeros is also much larger than England. Yeah, absolutely. George R. Martin said it's about the length of South America. Alexandra Vladimir saying the winter is not that cold at the wall, even though winter is coming. The ground is not frozen. Yeah, but there's certainly very deep, many feet deep, tens of feet deep of snow at Winterfell. So there's a lot there. Per Marcus Risman saying, as a Swede, it seems too cold in Winterfell at summer for it to correlate with my native land. Fair enough. And I'm just trying to. It looks like we don't have anyone from Italy here who's commenting, which is a shame. Reflective Rambling saying 1 million subs equals IDG WTT con. I'm not sure what the WTT stands for. I'm probably being a bit dense there, but at a million, I don't know. I have to cover even when I ever reached 1 million subs, I would have to come up with something. Josie Summermore saying snow so deep that people jump into it. Creative Branch is saying I was in Italy last winter, not frozen. Oh, the well-told tale, WTT. Thank you. Yes, of course. Convention. I think that's pushing it a little bit, but it's a lovely idea. 444. Talking about the letter from Prince Nymor, the letter that Aegon got, which ended the wars with Dawn. Do you think that George R. Martin knows exactly what is inside, or will he decide later if ever needed? I think he's probably not written it out, so I don't think he knows the exact content of the letter, but I think he he understands roughly what's in that letter. And I think we can understand roughly what's in that letter. We just don't know all of the details, because it's very clear we know what the context for the letter was, and we know what happened after the letter, and that those two things rule out a lot. The context is that this was delivered with Meraxi's skull, with the skull of the dragon, and by the heir, effectively, to Dawn. So this is a peace offering. This is not a big threat. This is just here, have back this dragon head, and here this is being delivered by my most treasured person. So this is a peace offering. This is not an expendable person coming, just giving them a random thing, saying, I'm not going to give you anything. This is, I give you this as a gesture of goodwill. Here's a letter as well. So that's the context. What happened afterwards was peace, and not a grudging peace. And that's the important point here, is that Aegon didn't just say, okay, I signed the piece of paper, we're at peace, and that's it, and then sort of sit there grumbling and saying, oh, I wish I wasn't there, but they threatened me with whatever. They meet up. They seem to get on. This seems to be a reasonable peace. So whatever it was in that letter was not a bad thing. This was something, a good gesture that guaranteed peace. So what exactly it was, the hint obviously is he went to Dragonstone, so there was something at Dragonstone which the Dornish had obviously made to be there. The implication must therefore be that that was Rhaenys' body. So I don't think he knows the exact detail, but I think that he knows, as I think we can figure out, pretty much what it says. Curtis Frank saying, is the con being held in Robert's living room, and will it be a sleepover? Well, I think that's probably about the extent of the interest in an IDG con would be a half a dozen people sleeping over. You'd be very welcome. JD Finity saying, in the main series, if Viserys had lived long enough to meet Fagon, do you think he would have relinquished his claim or fought for the throne? Sorry, this isn't Aegon related, by the way. That's not a problem. I'll pick this one up. So in the main A Song of Ice and Fire series, Fagon appears, the person claiming to be Aegon VI, we call him Fagon because most people believe that he's a fake Aegon. He appears after Viserys died. Now, what would have happened if he appeared while Viserys was there? Would Viserys have fallen in behind him? Almost certainly not. He came across, Viserys was not a very sympathetic character. He's not the kind of person that you think will naturally say, oh, so you're ahead of me in the line of succession. Of course, you can take over. No, that's not what he would have been about. He would have said, no, this is my rule. I am the rightful heir. I have no idea who you are. The Targaryens, let's not forget, never had an easy succession. If you read Fire and Blood, pretty much every single time there was some sort of succession crisis. Aegon claimed the crown by force. He passed it to his son Aenys, which seemed to go okay, but the moment he died, Maegor claimed it by force. Jaehaerys claimed it by force. Let's not forget he claimed that Ariel was the clear heir at that point, and he claimed it regardless. After he died, he had to have the Great Council because it wasn't clear who was going to take over from him. The Dance of the Dragons was a succession crisis after Viserys, who'd been named in then. So pretty much every single generation there is a succession crisis. There would have been a succession crisis if Fagon had appeared while Viserys was there. Viserys would not have accepted him. I think that, for me, that's quite clear based on the history of the Targaryens and also what appears to be Viserys' character. Nate Davis saying, just joining, no clue if this would be nice, but do you think Visenya really disliked her sister and that's part of why she wanted so badly to place Meg on the throne? No, I think that it was sort of picked up on, but just to be clear, I think she did not dislike her. Well, she might have disliked her sister, but I think she was loyal and treated it as family. I think she thought that Aenys was not a good king and Maegor would make a better king. Lady Pushkin's picking up also on this letter from Prince Nymor saying, do you think it's odd that Daria Martell returned Meraxi's skull but not Rhaenys' body and bones? Do you think that she survived long enough to write the letter, or who do you think wrote it and what of its content? So the only thing I would add to what I just said one moment ago here is in terms why they didn't just, if this was a returning of Rhaenys' bones, why didn't they just send them? I think that the simple, I'm going to treat Prince Nymor as if he understands human nature here. If they had just gone, oh, by the way, your sister was, we shot her down and she was held in a prison and tortured for a long, long time. Here's her body back. Do you want peace? I think the answer to that would be no. No, not at all. If they come and say, well, here, effectively as a hostage is my heir, here is the dragon skull, and now let me write you a nice long letter explaining how I'm deeply sorry for what happened and it wasn't anything to do with me. You won't want this body to be seen by anybody else because it's horrific. However, I have undercover sent it to Dragonstone so that you can do your own burial rites. That I think would work. That makes sense. So why not just send the body there? Because if it was tortured, it might not look good and it would just inflame. People like Visenya would never have forgiven if they saw a tortured body. 444. Do you think that Aegon's dream or prophecy was simply accidentally not passed to some generation? For example, due to some unexpected death, or just one of the rulers said something like, nothing happened for 200 years, it must have just been some kind of fairy tale. So, pardon me. So this is a really interesting one. It's one, again, that I will definitely look into it in more detail. But my working hypothesis is that there are two possible times at which this prophecy got lost. Now, we know it was there. Viserys had it. He passed it on to Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra seems to have talked to Daemon. They didn't, on the show, it doesn't seem as if it was a long conversation, but she did talk to him about it. So it got that far. By the time we get to Rhaegar, he seems to have discovered anew some prophecy. So he seems to have rediscovered this. So it got lost somewhere in between those two. I think there are two obvious places. The first is in the Dance of the Dragons itself. Obviously, Rhaenyra dies and Daemon dies. Rhaenyra probably will have taken the same policy that her father took, which is pass this on to your heir. And not necessarily straight away, but when you name them your heir, then you pass this on to them. So I think there's a fair chance that she will say it to Jacaerys, but hashtag spoilers here, by the way, I should say, for all of these live streams, my rule is book spoilers are fine. Show spoilers are not, but obviously something that happens in the book will probably happen, or something very similar will happen on the show. So if you don't want to know at all roughly what happens, then maybe this isn't the thing for you. But that said, if she tells Jacaerys, her heir, he dies. What does she then do? Well, also previous to that, already she's lost Lucerys, so Joffrey is next in line. Joffrey's still quite a young child, but he dies in King's Landing. He climbs on top of a dragon and tries to stop the storming of the dragon pit and dies. So he's gone as well. She then gets a very short period of time when she is there with a very young child who is going to eventually become Aegon the Third. Does she tell him? Will he understand? That is the first point at which this could have been lost, is that she might not have told him because she died unexpectedly, or she might have told him but he was too young to really understand it. Or thirdly, with that, he might have understood it, but he turned his back on it completely. The Aegon the Third, when he became king, he saw so many horrors with dragons. He saw his brother die because of flying on a dragon. He saw his mother being killed by a dragon. He hated dragons. He banned dragon eggs from King's Landing. He was it was during his reign that all the dragons died. Now eventually apparently he came round to seeing the importance of dragons, but for certainly the first part of his life he hated dragons, and so he may well have just pushed that out of his mind, that prophecy. So this is the first point. He may not have successfully got from Rhaenyra to Aegon the Third. The second point is passing it on to Baelor. If Baelor the Blessed, who became known as Baelor the Blessed, got the prophecy, he basically turned his back on all of the Targaryen-y, dragon-y, Valyrian-y stuff and became a zealot for the Faith of the Seven. He would not have passed that on to his heir. He would not have passed a prophecy on about what the role of the Targaryens is and how they need dragons and things like that. That would not be a thing that he would have passed on. So that is the second point at which it could have gone. Now, with all of this, there are ways that this could have got around. Maybe Daemon could have told Viserys, his other child. Maybe Baelor might not have got it, but somehow the message got passed on to I don't know, one of the others, Aegon the Fourth, someone like that. Maybe it worked its way around somehow. But those are two logical points where this could have passed. I don't think it was just they just generally forgot about it. I think there was a specific breakpoint somewhere where this wasn't passed on. The Lady Eternal connected to this, saying, "Good time zone, Robert. Good time zone to you. Aegon's dream being inscribed on the dagger seems to be the most direct Tolkien reference in the Song of Ice and Fire universe. Why do you think George R. R. Martin had House of the Dragon showrunners make it that blatant?" Well, I actually think that the inscription of the prophecy onto that dagger, the dagger that we know of from Game of Thrones as the cat's paw dagger, is an example of what George R. R. Martin was talking about when he was talking about the two types of canon. Now, I talked a bit earlier in the stream about that interview that he did with History of Westeros, where this was really teased out properly, I think, for the first time. He sees there as being two canons: book canon and show canon. And he wants them, first of all, to be as close together as possible, but also he wants all of the different shows canon to be as close together as possible. Now, what that means is, in the world of House of the Dragon, as a TV show, that is the same canon world as what happened in Game of Thrones TV show. It's not the same canon world as A Song of Ice and Fire. Yes, George R. R. Martin wants them to be as close as possible to each other, but obviously there are differences between the ending of Game of Thrones and what will happen at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin has told us as much. One of those differences is connected to the cat's paw dagger. In Game of Thrones Season 8, as I'm sure you do not need reminding, the cat's paw dagger, which was the one which had the prophecy on, was used to kill the knights, the Night King, and end the threat from the north. So on a very, very, very literal level, the prophecy on that dagger was the thing which ended the threat from the north, and all of the prophecy came true because of that. The Targaryens did indeed manage to save the world of the living, etc., because of that prophecy, the dagger. So I think that was as simple as that. They're just trying to tie off what happened there on the show, which means that if the cat's paw dagger comes up again in the book, which it may well not, that may be it as far as we're concerned, then that might not have the prophecy on it. That might not be there book canon. So I think this is it's definitely a show canon thing. Whether it corresponds across to book canon, I think, is a slightly different matter. Andrew K saying, with Aegon's dreams, how much wider understanding do you think he had beyond unification? I wonder if more narrow focused, like show Viserys's dreams. Yes, so there's my take on this. I think I've got a question from my patron, so I don't want to step on the toes of that question. But my general take is that the prophecies, the Targaryen prophecies, the Targaryen dreams get more focused the closer to the actual event of the second long night they get. So first of all, you have to leave Valyria because it's going to blow up. Okay. You have to take over the Seven Kingdoms because of a vague threat from the north. Okay. You have to unite the Seven Kingdoms. The Targaryens have to rule. As it goes through, then more and more, this is when the dragons have gone, you have to hatch dragon eggs. By the time we get to Daenerys, she's having dragon dreams of riding on a dragon and breathing fire down onto ice creatures. It's suddenly got incredibly literal about what it is that she's supposed to be doing through these dragon dreams. So they start off as very vague, and then they start focusing in. And so, yes, the move from Aegon the Conqueror's vision to Viserys's will start to get more precise about what they ought to be doing. Question from Flopsy B saying, find it difficult to square Aegon's dream as conquest impetus rather than Valyrian politics, history, or complexity. Is the prophecy a simplification? Well, the prophecy is definitely a simplification. It's described as a dream, and in any way that you describe it is necessarily simplifying it. Now, Viserys sort of had this spiel that he gave to Rhaenyra, but what he actually effectively gave her, or showed her, was the dagger, which had a very, I can't remember the exact words, but it was a very simple and short prophecy on there. Now, all of that, therefore, means that the intricacies of whatever it was that Aegon dreamt will have been lost. Of course, they'll have been lost. It's by this point, it's been passed down, 4 generations? It's not going to be the exact same thing because it appears not to be written down. That's the fascinating thing about this. There are many fascinating things. This is one of the fascinating things about this, is the fact that Viserys doesn't say, on here, look at this scroll, read it, this is what it is, this is what the prophecy is. He's clearly memorized what this is based on what he's been told by his father, his grandfather perhaps, and if it came from Jaehaerys to him once he got named heir, Jaehaerys was old. He seems to have been at this point suffering some kind of dementia, perhaps, based on purely on what we read in Fire and Blood. So it won't have been a particularly exact handing down, probably, of a prophecy. So it's a simplification for purely normal human reasons. When you're talking about whether it's Valyrian politics / history / complexity, I think that there's definitely possibility. We do not know, and I don't think we will know unless and until we get a TV show about Aegon's conquest and actually see Aegon. I think that we will not know the details of exactly what this is, and specifically what the Valyrian element of it, because that may have happened with Daenerys. We still don't know the exact nature of that prophecy. We just know that she had a dream that meant that they all went out. Did she have a literal dream of, I saw volcanoes erupting in the entire peninsula blowing up? I don't know. Did she have a dream that had some hint of, and you have to go to Westeros about it? Maybe. We're not entirely sure. Attach Altanos is in the chat, one of the finest artists we have in this Song of Ice and Fire community. I'm sure somebody in the one of the moderators will be able to give a link across to his artwork, which was on the cover of the recent Rise of the Dragon book. So it was excellent. So if you saw the cover of that, that was him. Excellent work, Attach. Let's go to a question from Dan McKay, saying, I think Valyrians were likely not incestuous, and it was Aegon's idea to keep the family's bloodline pure in order to fulfill prophecy. What do you think? So I don't, this isn't ever specifically said about Valyria. We know very little about Valyria. But if the idea is that you need to be of Valyrian heritage in order to be a dragon rider, which seems to be at least part of it, then yes, it makes sense when you've got one family that then you get the incest. It does not make sense in Valyria. There were 40 dragon riding families, so logically they could intermarry. We know that there was a whole load of politics going on there, and it kind of makes sense that marriage is a big part of politics, joining families together and so on. So my best guess is that you're entirely right. In Valyria, there was no need for all of that incesty stuff. Did Aegon invent this? It seems not. Probably the Targaryens, when they went to Dragonstone, they knew that the House Velaryon was there, so they did intermarry with them. But yes, they were marrying amongst themselves for a few generations before we get Aegon and his two sister wives. That doesn't seem to have caused a scandal in the family, those two. So did he invent it? I don't think he invented it, but certainly that will have been the case from the time they're in Dragonstone. Now, for that to have just not to have even been an option implies that maybe it was sometimes practiced in Valyria, just not necessary. So I wouldn't say it would never happen to Valyria, but the hints are probably it didn't have to happen. Question from Urban Lioness saying, I have been watching your lovely videos for years. Thank you. Delighted to catch you live for the first time. Well, welcome. It's great to see you. Clinical insomnia is rough, but you're my go-to. Yeah, I make a lot of people fall asleep. I can get hours of pleasant learning or sleep. Either way, you're a blessing. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. I've taken to the point of taking it as a compliment when people say that they fall asleep listening to me. Let's go to a question from Sam Chastain saying, "Hi Robert, I feel like Aegon's reputation in Westeros is highly regarded. Why do you think this is? Arguably, he did many things that disrupted the status quo, such as destroying major houses, raising lesser lords, leaving his sisters to rule for years at a time, and opposing the major religion." Well, yeah, he is held in high regard, but he's held in high regard by the histories that we have from the Maesters. What would be interesting is to get a history a few generations after the end of the Targaryens, how they would view his rule. Now, would that be treated as kindly? Because the main thing is that he was the first. He was the first of the Targaryen rulers of all of Westeros. I think that he would always be treated as a strong and capable king. I think that there's no way you can look around that. He was the first person that we know of to unify the continent. Yes, he didn't quite manage to get Dawn, but the rest of it he took over. So that is quite a feat. And during his reign, yeah, there was some sort of rumblings and small rebellions, but he managed to keep control. And that's something that in both of his children, Aenys and Maegor, they had constant rebellions. Aegon managed to broadly avoid that. So will he be... why is he treated as this great leader? Because I think that he was, historically speaking, clearly a strong leader. Does that make him a good leader? In some ways, yes, but as we've already mentioned, perhaps he wasn't the best father. Perhaps he kept a lot to himself that he could have shared. One thing which I personally think he did well was this kind of, delegation, sharing power with his sisters. They ruled more than he did, really. Emma Summerhill saying, "Hi Robert, I love your videos and you've inspired me to read the books." I love it. I love it when people say that. Just joined Patreon. Oh, welcome. Thank you so much. Did Aegon have a deep connection with Balerion, and did he ride him often after the conquest? Yes, he did have a strong connection with Balerion. Did he ride him after the conquest? Yes. We don't read of him riding him for pleasure in the way that we do some others. So Rhaenys seems to have ridden Meraxes just out of enjoying riding a dragon. A lot of others we read about just enjoying riding their dragon. Aegon certainly seemed to use Balerion as a very effective tool. Their bond was clearly strong, but and we never see what something which happens quite a bit later on is that the big dragons, when they get older, are harder to control, and we don't see that with Aegon. He seems to always be in control is perhaps the wrong words for it, but in tune with Balerion. Now, particularly with Balerion, you know, I'm sure, in Fire and Blood, the story of Balerion, an area who climbed on the back of Balerion and clearly couldn't control the dragon. Dany clearly couldn't control Drogon when we last saw her in A Song of Ice and Fire. Viserys, I don't know, but the hints are perhaps he had a bad experience with Drogon, because on the show he's very much there. Oh, you know, dragons that maybe we shouldn't have ever. They can't be tamed. That maybe we shouldn't have ever tried to control these dragons. Which is a really weird thing for an ex-dragon rider to be saying, unless he personally had some experience, which probably Balerion at the end of his life would have been quite hard to control. So a good bond, yes, undoubtedly. Did he ride him? Yes, but most often for practical reasons or for war. Let's go to a question from Caius Ballerina. Oh, picking up a question for Skidu Vita. What did the Targaryens think of the native Westerosi magic before the Maesters? Or did they just not know of it till the Maesters books? Well, I suppose it depends on what you count as the Westerosi magic and what and who you count as the Targaryens, because there are lots of different answers to this. Certainly, when we get to Bloodraven and the like, there is clearly an acceptance of the magic of the old gods, and I'm just trying to think back whether there's anything even earlier than that. In terms of sort of the magic, the thing with the Faith of the Seven is that there's very little obvious magic connected with it. So did they think that there was a magic there which could oppose them? We never really get that impression. They didn't really go north, so they didn't really face the magic of the old gods. What they seem to have done, though, is tried their best to accommodate. In contrast to the Andal invasion, for example, or parts of the Andal invasion and parts of the First Men invasion, where they would chop down weirwood trees, the Targaryens seem to have just accepted it. They said, okay, well, we can have the Faith of the Seven. That can be our official faith. We can have weirwood tree. Certainly, we saw in House of the Dragon, there's a weirwood tree in the Red Keep. Maybe it's just lip service, a little tip of the hat to it. They didn't seem to engage in any particular concern for magic. The one bit which is left hanging in Fire and Blood Part 1 is Alice Rivers, though. Now, she is magical, very clearly. And we don't know yet how they're going to tackle that. Because we've got Aegon the Third in power, and he clearly doesn't like the dragony magic, and there's no reason to think that he would like any other kind of magic. The Maesters will have been trying to downplay magic all the way through. So it's a mixed picture, is basically what I'm trying to say. They will have been aware of it. Aegon studied the continent before he invaded it, but I don't think that they thought there was any magic that they needed to be particularly worried about. Let's go to a question from Martin S. saying, how long does a one-way journey from Winterfell to King's Landing or the other direction take approximately when riding a dragon? Oh, I did work this out. Let's see whether I can remember. Somebody in the chat will, I'm sure, have this to hand. But if you, when you go from Dragonstone up to the wall, that should take a few days, a couple of days, I think. So basically, to go to Old Town from King's Landing, you would stop on the way. This wasn't just one single flight. This is a couple of overnights, basically. I'm sure somebody in the chat will have, I think it's 1,500 miles from King's Landing up to the wall. So it's a long old way, even on Dragonback. We get in Fire and Blood a few different journeys that we read of, but we don't get specific, and it also will depend on the dragon, because some of the smaller dragons actually are often quicker, but have to stop more regularly. Ernie Miles Kila member of the Members Club. Welcome. Saying, hey, I'm a huge fan of your videos. Could you possibly do some videos on the Wheel of Time? I've done one Wheel of Time video, actually. I did that, sort of an introduction to the Wheel of Time just before it came out. And that seemed to be reasonably well received. I will consider it. It's a matter of time, as much as, I'll be honest, as much as anything else, is that I do enjoy the Wheel of Time. But it's a matter of whether I've got the time to do it. Perhaps not this year. Maybe I'll do some more in the future. But just trying to work out whether to tease something now. Yeah, keep an eye out for announcements over the next 2 or 3 weeks. I've got a lot of things that I've just got planning, and so I will open up the content a little bit more. Maybe not in the main videos on this channel, but more broadly, I will expect to hear me talk a little bit more about things like that. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert, hola. In comparison with the rest of the kings of Westeros over the 300 years after the conquest, how would you rate Aegon the First? I mean, Jaehaerys the First has to be at the top, but after him, where would you put would you put Aegon the First or another king? Thanks." Well, a lot of this is down to personal preference, and also what are you ranking them on? Are you ranking them on competence? Are you ranking them on how good a king they are? There are a few. I mean, I think I'd find it hard to disagree with Jaehaerys. He, as well as presiding over a period of peace and prosperity, very broadly, he also did a lot of the boring but very important things that actually improved people's lives. He got the sanitation going in King's Landing. He got fresh water into King's Landing. He started building the King's Road, which helped travel times. He codified the different laws of the land. He listened to Alicent when she was identifying issues like the right to the first night that really needed to be dealt with. So he did a lot. So I think I would not disagree with Jaehaerys. That doesn't mean that he's without flaws. He was also the person who brought in this doctrine of Targaryen exceptionalism, which I'm personally not a big fan of, but he did quite a lot of good. Aegon, I think, yeah, he's definitely up there in terms of both competence of what he achieved, and also was he a good king? I mean, fair and hard, rather than loving and caring. But yeah, so Aenys seems to have been a good person, loved by lots of people, perhaps not very effective. The issue we have when comparing all of these different kings is that we have a lot more information about the earlier kings than we do about the later kings, who we'll learn about in Fire and Blood Part 2 at some point, hopefully. But Aegon V, Egg, from what we read, probably, certainly until his last few days or years, was a good king. He cared about the common people. He tried to push through rules and legislation which were there for the small folk. So he seems to have been a good and generally competent king as well. Aerys the Second was the Mad King. Aerys the First seems to have been a generally good guy as well. There are a couple of others that you kind of pick out as being generally good, but in terms of pure competence, you have to put Aegon the First up there, and yeah, somewhere in the top 5. I don't think anyone would really disagree. Kartik Prapu saying, a question from Dagon Thanos saying, "Hi Robert, I'm honoured to join the wonderful IDG community." Well, welcome. Question: how is George R. R. Martin's version of Dark Daenerys, and how will that compare to Aegon the Conqueror? Right, so Dark Daenerys we haven't seen yet in the books. So we always have to tread a bit carefully. But George R. Martin has been very clear that the arc that she's going to go down, certainly for the next book, is quite a dark one, and he's said that quite clear. If you want to go down a fascinating rabbit hole, there's the Miranese blog, I think it was, did this very long erudite series of blog posts about Dany's arc in A Dance with Dragons. This is years ago, because they felt that people hadn't understood what her arc there was about. George R. Martin very, 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 very rarely comments on this kind of thing, but he specifically has commented on it and said, and I wish I could have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something like, "Yes, finally somebody really understands what I was trying to do here." And that basically says Daenerys' arc there is an arc which takes her to a position where she is now embracing, turning her back on being Dany the conciliator, the peaceful queen of Meereen. She's now embracing her inner Targaryen, the fire and blood. She's going to go down a dark path. And George R. Martin says yes. So what that exactly means, we'll have to wait and see. But how does that echo with Aegon? Well, there are going to be obvious echoes. She has 3 dragons. There were 3 dragons. She's invading from Essos. He was invading sort of from Essos. It was from Dragonstone, but he was invading from the east. And Drogon is very clearly an echo of Balerion, the Black Dread. So there are the obvious kind of things. I think that we will get some echoes. As we did on the TV show, they effectively had a Field of Fire moment. I think that we'll have something very similar to that. Whether we will have the equivalent of a Harrenhal moment, I don't know. But the issue is the dragon has 3 heads, and that I think is going to be the big difference. I know you were looking for similarities, but I think the echoing similarities are very clear. But I think that the big thing which is going to be missing potentially is this dragon has 3 heads. We've been told that it's a terrible thing for a Targaryen to be on their own, says Maester Aemon. He's now dead. He's another Targaryen who's there. Maybe she will, well, I'm sure she will at some point meet Fagon. Will they join forces? Probably not. But what about Jon? Will they join forces? Well, probably yes. But will they ever reach the point of 3 Targaryens on 3 dragons? Probably no. And I think that will be where these kind of similarities start to fall apart, because can one Targaryen do what Aegon the Conqueror did? No, because that was a team. That was the dragon with 3 heads, and Dany will not be the dragon with 3 heads. Princess Scarlet 2 says, take a drink every time he takes his glasses off. I would highly recommend you don't. As Silver Scale says, you'd be dead. Rabbi Mitra saying, wish to resurface Tony Teflon's theory again in 2023. Okay, which theory is this? Are Daenerys and Aegon's dragon dreams down to Bran and the Weirwood Network going back and orchestrating their movements? Well, I think this is an interesting idea. I've not seen, if Tony did a video on it, I've not seen it, so I don't know all of the details of where that's come from. My instinct is that, certainly as far as Daenerys is concerned, the Weirwood Network seems to not have a connection across to Essos. That seems to be a blank space for them. They don't seem to have control there. We don't get any kind of there may well be Children of the Forest equivalents over there, but there seems to be a disconnect in the Weirwood network because the Weirwood network is hooked up, as far as we can tell, underground. It does not go across to Essos. So I think no. The answer is no for me as a first instinct. As for Aegon, Dragonstone again seems to be cut off, as far as we can tell. We've not heard that there's a weirwood tree on Dragonstone, but Dragonstone is interesting in terms of its connection in with the Weirwood network, Green Seers, and so on, because of, and I've said for years, I'll put this down in a theory at some point, and I never have, but because I don't know exactly what the theory is. It's an observation, really, rather than a theory. There is something to do with islands and the importance of islands in connection with ancient times in Westeros and the Weirwood network. We have the Isle of Faces, which is clearly very important. This is the center, as far as we can tell, of the Weirwood network. We also get Starfall, which is where House Dane are based. They are this ancient house with the sword Dawn. Clearly, they are connected with the Long Night in some way. We have Dragonstone, which is another island. And although it appears not immediately directly related to the Weirwood network, this is where Dragonglass comes from. They've got mines of Dragonglass under there, and the Dragonglass was what was being used, obviously, to be fighting the others. And the Children of the Forest used Dragonglass, so at some point they must have had some kind of link across to there. And also we have, as a slightly left field thing, Battle Isle. Ancient. This is where Old Town, the High Tower, is based. That seems to have been a trading post, presumably with the Children of the Forest. So there are links across there. So Dragonstone, I've put a little asterisk by. I will happily defer and doff my cap to whatever Tony has worked up. But that's my first instinct, is in Essos, the Weirwood network doesn't really have a link across. Question from Flopsy B, which is a lovely name, by the way. Just to thank you for such a thoughtful answer to my vague question earlier, and agree that Danny the Conciliator would be a truly awful original name. Well, yes, absolutely. Well, and you're welcome. But yeah, so this was. I think I came up with that. I don't think that was what she was wishing to be called. But the idea in Marine, just to unpack that just one more layer, is that if you look at those chapters in Dance with Dragons, when she's in Marine, every single time she's making a compromise, and she's learning that she cannot do the thing that she was thinking she wanted to do. First of all, she's faced with an issue. The dragons are killing sheep and maybe even a child. Oh, I'm going to have to lock up my dragons. How are you going to get rid of the Sons of the Harpy? Well, I'm going to have to marry this guy who I don't love, but I'll do it anyway because that's politically expedient. I'm going to have to dress like these people. All of these things, chapter after chapter. It's just this making some bow to the demands and needs of managing a city that she is not culturally attached to, and each step is taking her further and further away from her Targaryen inheritance. And that is why we get the Quaithe in her dreams saying, "Remember who you are. The dragons know who you are. Fire and blood. You're a Targaryen. You're supposed to be invading places, not just ruling some land you don't know." So that's what it is. And then when she heads off at the end on Drogon, and she goes out into the Dothraki Sea, and the imagery, read that last bit of imagery. We get a blood-bruised sky. She gazes into the west to this blood-bruised sky, and the imagery there is very clear. She's going to go west, and there's going to be fire and blood. So that's the arc that she's been going on down there. Carl Kosnock saying Dany can head down a dark path without following it to its end. It's only right that she at least be tempted by power and or the lack thereof. The last mile of the marathon is the hardest. Yeah, absolutely. So this is when I was saying we have to sort of tread a bit carefully with this. It's George R. Martin has told us where the path that she's going down. He has not told us where the end of that path is. We know which way she's going. She will be dealing out a whole lot of damage to a whole lot of people. She will be finally making up her mind to invade Westeros, to claim the throne that she believes is hers. All of these things that she's going to be doing, she's not going to let anyone get in her way. What we do not know is what happens at the very end. Winterfell's Keeper saying, now that we have a new showrunner for season 2, how do you think the show will be affected? I don't think the show will be hugely affected. I think Ryan Condal is very much the main man in this, as he was in season 1. The way that we had 2 showrunners for season 1, Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. Sapochnik was a lot more, because he's a director, fundamentally, who became a showrunner. He had experience of Game of Thrones. He was the person, the experience of running the ship. Do you run a ship? You know what I mean. Ryan Condal was the nerdy law guy. So in terms of the nerdy lawness of it, that's going to continue, definitely. What we may see is a slightly different artistic direction. But I suspect it's not going to be huge, because why would they change it? They've got a massive hit on their hands. Why would they change something? They just want more of the same. So I don't think we're going to see a massive change to anything. Nate Davis asking if Aegon's prophecy will surface in the next few books. We will get more on this. George R. Martin's basically said, yes, so we have to keep an eye out for it. George R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. I wanted to ask you about Aegon's half-brother and strong right hand, Oddys Baratheon. How did he come to be so close with Aegon being a bastard? Was House Baratheon just a super minor house before the conquest? And does that technically make him a dragon seed? Technically, yes. Assuming that the rumors are correct and there's no reason to doubt them, yes, he is a dragon seed. I think the key point here is that Baratheon is not even a house. That's not. We don't know who his mother was, but he was bastard born, so it's not. He's not even a house. He's just a person. And if Aegon was, as we have been told he was, this very insular, this enigma, who kept a very close, and a lot of this actually incidentally echoes what we read about Rhaegar many, many years later. Very close circle of friends who knew what was going on, and the rest did not. If he was there, if Oddys Baratheon was there in that close circle of friends, it makes sense. And it may well be that there was not a plan from the beginning. I will make you a lord of a great house. Aegon seems to have been genuine in saying, if you bend to the lords of Westeros, if you bend the knee, then you can stay on. If you don't, then I will kill you and replace you. And that's exactly what he did. So the people who bent the knee, Torrhen Stark, for example, they allowed to stay where they were. The Lannisters were allowed to stay where they were. Those who didn't, House Hall, Black Heron, then Argilac the Black down in Storm's End. These people, the Gardeners in the Reach, these people lost power. And then what Aegon had to do was decide, who am I putting in place? And the obvious thing for him to do was to put people in place who he trusted. Not just like rando people who happened to be, I'm the next in the pecking order in that area. he wanted people who he trusted. So obviously, yes, Storm's End, I will put the person that I trust the most, other than my two sisters, the person I trust the most, you can go there. The next Lord of the Riverlands was not the next most powerful lord in the Riverlands. It was not the oldest house in the Riverlands. It was not the richest house in the Riverlands. It was the Tullys, because they were the first to kneel. And that was why. They were the ones that he could trust the most. So that's the simple answer, is that he trusted him, and that's why he made him Lord. But if none of those major lords had fought him, then probably we would get Oris Baratheon wouldn't have become House Baratheon. He would have just been, I don't know, stewards of King's Landing or something. Martin S. saying, not about A Song of Ice and Fire. Sorry, there was a major reveal of a Wheel of Time last book secret a couple of days ago on a stream with Brandon Sanderson and a Wheel of Time channel fellow. Recommend checking it out. I didn't know that. That's intriguing. I will go and have a look. I'm going to assume that was the Dusty Wheel, who is excellent, and he has Brandon Sanderson on. I wouldn't say regularly, but he's had him on a few times. For those who are wondering about Brandon Sanderson, who is a good, very good, and prolific writer of fantasy fiction, what his connection is with the Wheel of Time. When Robert Jordan, who wrote most of the Wheel of Time, died, then Brandon Sanderson took over and wrote the last 3 books in the series, so based on his notes. So he's the closest to the person who sort of holds the standard for the Wheel of Time. But thank you for that. I'll go and check that out. Let's go to a question from Shelley J, saying, hello, Robert. Happy New Year. And to you. Looking forward to the series about the rulers of Westeros. Yes, after this one, as I say, I think I'm going to do Rhaenys and Visenya next, and then we'll move through the rulers after that, picking up a few random Targaryens who perhaps should have ruled and didn't. It feels to me that the creators of the House of the Dragon TV series kind of threw a wrench in the works by introducing the prophecy about a Targaryen ruler needing to be on the throne to beat back the threat from the north. It seems to cast a different new light on much of the post-conquest history. What are your thoughts on it? It does indeed. A wrench in the works is one way of saying it. I think this was cleared through George R. R. Martin, and the way that George R. R. Martin has talked about it, that does make it sound as if this has been a part of his plans for A Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe not in this specific way, but has been a part of his plans. The way he's talked about dragon dreamers have existed all through the history of the Targaryens, and this is basically tying it all together, is what he's saying. And yeah, it's true that he gave us Daenerys the Dreamer. We also know about Maester Aemon. We know about Deeren the Drunkard, so we know that they're there. But then you also add in John the Fiddler, who was Daemon II Blackfire, obviously a Targaryen by another name, and then you add in a few other people who had dragon dreams. Dany started getting dragon dreams. Actually, from quite early on, she got dragon dreams about hatching a dragon. But he's added these in time and time again. And it was noticeable. Looking back, it makes a whole lot more sense. But there was, in the build-up to Fire and Blood being launched, when the book came out, there was this series of... I think he just did one interview, George R. R. Martin, but they clipped it into lots of short, different quotes about him, about different things. And he said, some have speculated that Aegon the Conqueror invaded Westeros because he got a prophecy about the White Walkers and the others, and he was there to take over. And that made me and lots of other people really excited, thinking, "Oh, this is new. This is George R. R. Martin talking about something we weren't sure about." And then when you read Fire and Blood, it's not there at all. And so I, and I suspect a few others, went back and said, "Well, okay, let's look at what he actually said." He said, "Some have speculated that. That doesn't mean that that's reality. That's just, maybe this was just taken out of context." But now, looking back at it, it seems very clear that was. He was actually telling us then that was what was going on, and now he's dropped this in with what happened with House of the Dragon. So yes, it's throwing a spanner in the works, a wrench in the works, but this is from George R. R. Martin, and I think that we will see more of this when we get the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, hopefully much later. We will see a lot of this woven through. We're going to see this thread of Targaryen prophecy. How exactly we'll see that, don't know yet. But I think that we will see this thread of Targaryen prophecy appearing in there to confirm what we've learned through House of the Dragon. Lady Eternal saying, off topic, have you been watching the new Quantum Leap? I have not. I mean, the old Quantum Leap was really fun, but I've not seen that for a very long time. So I didn't have to know that they'd relaunched it, but yeah, let me know if it's good. On topic, do you think Balerion ever flew to Valyria with Aegon, or did he only do that with riders who weren't strong enough to fully control him? I think we would have heard if Aegon flew off to Valyria, because that is a long flight. It would have taken them quite some time. And as we saw when Balerion went there with Arya, that there are things there that are pretty powerful. So I think we would have heard if he went there. The sort of implication about what happened with Arya Targaryen, this is in Fire and Blood, Arya, very young, but adventurous Targaryen, climbed onto the back of Balerion, trying to claim Balerion, and did manage to fly him, but he then flew off east and came back. What happened to her, very horrific, but basically he got attacked by some things while he was there. The clear implication is that he went to Valyria. The hints, I think, are that, and this is, I think, something that Septon Bath comes out with, is that this was, Valerion's old. He was going to die at some point soon. And being sort of roused from his slumbers, he just, and without somebody who was strong enough to actually sort of control where he was going, who just was basically there for the ride, he just went back home. Because that's where he was born. And so that's the kind of feel, is that it's just this old, almost geriatric dragon just going, well, okay, I'll head off home then. And that's the kind of feel. And so under Aegon and under Maegor, they were strong enough to control him, but Arya, no. Question from For My Peoples, saying, what are your thoughts on Jon possibly having dragon dreams after resurrecting, or coming into contact with Dany and her dragons? Yes, so I like the idea of him having dragon dreams. He doesn't seem to have had them yet. Now, you could possibly say there was a dream when he was standing as Azor Ahai atop the wall with his flaming sword. I personally think that was a dream that Bloodraven planted there. But when he comes back, is he going to be more likely to have dragon dreams? Maybe, I think, is the short answer. I think if George R. R. Martin had started giving him, because we're in our minds, we know who Jon is because we've seen the TV show, and that was pretty clear. And then we can look at the books and go, oh yeah, actually that all makes sense. But from his perspective, he's not revealed this yet, so he's not wanting to give clues out as to who Jon is, and Jon having dragon dreams would be a pretty big clue that he's a Targaryen. And I was just dreaming that I was flying on a dragon. No, that's not. That would just give too much away. So, I'm not sure we will see that. Him meeting Dany and then bonding with a dragon, probably Rangel. Absolutely. I think that on the show, he went down to try and get all the dragon glass from Dragonstone. Maybe there'll be a different reason in the books, but that seems like a good. I mean, someone will. I'm absolutely sure if the Night's Watch are convinced that the others are coming, and they're convinced that they've not got enough weapons to be fighting them with, then they will send someone to Dragonstone. So someone will go to Dragonstone. That much, I think, is pretty clear. Maybe it'll be Jon. And Dany will, at some point, be going to Dragonstone, very probably, because that makes sense. That's, again, this was where she was born, and it's largely undefended now, so she can go in there and have a great place to be launching an invasion from. One angry pagan saying, not sure where to start on making content about the Discworld. Any ideas? Currently stuck between either a character review or a book review. Well, I will give you the same advice I give to anyone who's thinking about starting YouTube. First of all, welcome to being part of the creators in YouTube. The best advice is just make something. Wherever your heart says, boom, that's the thing I want to talk about, do it. And the biggest mistake you can make to start with is spending too long doing it. Make a video, put it out there. 2 or 3 videos later, you'll look back and hate it. You think it will be the worst thing you've ever done, and you'll be really embarrassed by it. And that is evidence that you're getting better at it. So many people spend a long time thinking about making a video and not actually making a video. The way to learn how to make a good video is to make a video. If you go back on my channel to the very first video I ever did, I think it was about Tyrion. I can't watch it now. I hate it. My delivery is so slow. I just literally got some still shots from the TV show. I think I've run out of things to say. My voice is incredibly drony. I don't like it in the slightest. I didn't have a good microphone either. But I had to make that first video in order to make the next one better. So my advice, whichever one of those 2 things makes you go, yeah, I want to talk about that, and then put it out. Good luck, and let me know if you tweet at me or something when it's up there. I will happily retweet it. Always happy to support you creators. And I love the Discworld as well, so I will happily watch it. Alhad saying, hi, Robert, Happy New Year, and to you too. What are the parallels between Daenerys and Aegon? I think I've covered that bit already, but you said, what is the exact difference between Aegon's dream and the prince that was promised prophecy? So, what seems to have happened is the prince that was promised prophecy is almost interchangeable with Azor Ahai in terms of Azor Ahai Reborn. In terms of what this person's going to be doing, we don't get given the details of this, but what seems to have happened is that this is reintroduced to the Targaryen family through the Woods Witch, who comes with Jenny of Oldstones to the court in King's Landing. Now, this is almost certainly Bloodraven's doing. So, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. But he seems to reintroduce this idea of the prince that was promised not just being some generic prophecy about some person in the future who's going to do good things, but about the idea that the prince of the promise is going to come from this specific line of Targaryens, which means that you can connect it in that one of those people, this is how Rhaegar could think that he was the prince that was promised, and they think, oh, well, maybe it's not me, maybe it's my son who's the prince that was promised, and so on, because that got deliberately tied back in, because at some point the original prophecy got lost. The original prophecy, as far as we can tell from Aegon, is a lot more vague, but it is, there's a big threat from the north. The Targaryens have to save it. They have to unite the Seven Kingdoms, and so on. The prince that was promised is very specific. You're the person doing it. So that's where it is. And it's connected in with Azor Ahai. So people like Maester Aemon, Melisandre seem to use the two interchangeably. So it's very linked in with that. Nigel Milliken saying, hi Rob, what are the chances that Fagon is just some random kid with Valyrian features that Varys snatched up? It seems that the quintessential Mama's dragon wouldn't be of any nobility. Yes, so it's possible. It's very possible. Because the point of what Varys is saying, basically, is that actually the person who's the right king, this is not the right answer. You want the person who is the rightful king, the heir. This is not the right answer. You want the person who is good. You want the person who's been trained to rule, the person who understands the needs and concerns of the normal people in the world. That is what Varys seems to be getting at. Now, they could do that, they being him and Illyrio, could do that with anyone. They could snatch somebody up. But all of the hints are that this is actually a Blackfire descendant through Illyrio. So we get the connection with the Golden Company. We get the Illyrio sort of talking about, yes, the Blackfire line was ended through the male line, hinting that it didn't finish on the female line. We get the imagery of black and red dragons, and what does it matter what color the dragon? There's lots of suggestions and hints that this is the Blackfire line. So could it just be some random kid? Yeah, it could do, but the hints are that this isn't. Caius Ballerina saying, assuming the prophecy is real or somewhat accurate in the show universe, how can it be interpreted or squared with to fit the show ending, needing a Targaryen on the throne and united Westeros, etc.? So the prophecy in the show is vague, and we don't have the exact wording of it. So exactly what that means, we're not entirely sure. The Song of Ice and Fire, it seems to have been something that Rhaegar has learned, perhaps from the Woods Witch. How do they fit across? Well, I think they will be using the dagger more in a very literal way on the show, but I think that in the prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire can be used, could have even different words in the book. George R. Martin wants them to be as close as possible, and the main thing is, what this prophecy is it gets the Targaryens over, it gets them ruling, and it gets them ruling the Seven Kingdoms. That's the main point there. So where this ends up is that A Song of Ice and Fire seems to be in the book in a way that it isn't so far on the show, very much focused in on a person. Rhaegar, in that vision that Dany has, Rhaegar says that his son, the Song of Ice and Fire, is his song. He has a song. It's the Song of Ice and Fire. And he's very clear. This is very much linked in with the prince that was promised. It is a person who is going to be doing this saving, not just the Targaryens have to be there and stand ready, which is so far what we've had on the show. Question from the Lady Eternal. Hypothetically, if Aemond had let his brother escape and become the Green Heir, do you think he would have found the writing on the dagger? How might he have reacted? Okay, so if we have, I mean, this is a show thing because that setup was a show thing rather than something that was specifically in the books. Aemond was hunting for Aegon, and Aegon basically says, "Let me go. I'll go off to Essos. I don't want to be king." And Aemond basically says, "No, you got to lump it. You are the king." What would have happened if Aemond had let Aegon go? Well, first of all, the fact that he's disappeared does not mean that he's out of the game. Suddenly, he just becomes a loose piece on the board, and everybody will be searching for him. The fact that he says, "I don't want to be king," actually doesn't stop people rallying behind him. But would Aemond, your question is, would he have found the writing on the dagger? How might he have reacted? Well, he might have done. I don't think there's any specific reason why he would have done more than what would make you think that you should pick up this dagger from the king and then put it into the fire for a while and then stare at it and try and read the writing. It's hidden. It's hidden from all of the other Targaryens. None of them knew about it. So might he have? Well, possibly, but probably it was just hidden. Julapy didn't see a question attached to that. Just have a quick flick through. No, I can't see. Oh, here we go. I was going to say this is unrelated, but I've never been able to catch you live. Who would you think would win? Well, welcome to the live stream. Who would you think you win? Prime Barristan Selmy versus Aemond the Dragon Knight. Well, we've not seen the Dragon Knight in action. He was legendary, but I think Barristan the Bold at his prime was something else to behold. I mean, yes, he won tourneys and things like that, but there was the Defiance of Duskendale. If you've not heard this story, this is the mark of the man. At the Defiance of Duskendale, Aerys II, before he went completely Mad King, he was captured by a random lord who was trying to negotiate for better taxes in his port. A little bit of an overstep to then kidnap the king, but this happened and puts him in his castle dungeon, basically. And there's this 6-month siege. And basically, the Lord says, if you try and attack, then I will kill the king. And so they're waiting around and nobody can go anywhere. And eventually Tywin says, well, I've had enough. Tywin, who was Hand of the King at the time, says, I've had enough. I am going to attack because, we can't just stand here all this time. And Barristan goes, well, okay, you attack tomorrow morning. Tonight, I'm going to go and try and get the king. On my own, no one else. And he just charges the walls, climbs the walls, works his way down into the dungeon, killing anyone on the way, grabs the king, throws him over his shoulder, runs back out, kills anyone in the way, and escapes with the king. This is like ridiculously powerful. He was an absolute legend, was Barristan. And this is why when we get to Game of Thrones Book 1, when Cersei effectively gets rid of him, Joffrey does, gets rid of him, saying he's too old, and Tywin is horrified. I mean, this is one of the couple of reasons why he sends Tyrion down, just to take control of things, because he cannot have this. And the reason why he's horrified is not because he thinks that he's great, it's because the legend of Barristan is so great that people will rally to whichever king he is standing beside. People see Barristan as a sign of legitimacy. And so this is why it's so important that he's sided with Team Dany, because when they get to Westeros, assuming he's still there and with her, people will see that and go, if he's supporting her, then surely she must be legitimate. Okay, let's go to a question from Martin S. Has it ever happened in George R. Martin's world that a royal bastard managed to claim a throne or crown against the wishes of half-siblings born within wedlock? Or has that happened for the rulership of a house? So a royal bastard claiming winning the throne. Well, no. It stayed with the Targaryens. It stayed within wedlock all the way down. I'm desperately trying to think of whether there is any. There are a couple of instances when there was debate about whether somebody might not have been legitimate. We've covered Aenys and Maegor already, but it followed the line of legitimacy. Has it happened in any other house? I can't off the top of my head think of any. I will happily come back. I mean, maybe somebody in the chat can, but this is what normally happens is you get somebody gets legitimized and then they inherit ahead of somebody, rather than just a royal bastard inherits, because once you're legitimized, you're no longer a bastard, which is why Jon is an interesting case, because if he gets legitimized by, say, Stannis, or indeed Robb Stark in his will, then he becomes a Stark. He is no longer a bastard. He is now a part of a full member of House Stark and could inherit. And that would be ahead of, potentially, and this is where a lot of the political maneuverings in the North are going to happen in the Winds of Winter, I'm sure, potentially ahead of younger siblings like Bran, who Robb thinks is dead, but does that make a difference? Right, let's go with, I think I've got a couple of questions. Yeah, two more questions from my patrons. Creative Branches saying, water magic seems more varied than any other. The Drowned God, the Children's Hammer of the Waters, and the Lost Water Mages of the Rhoyne. When looking deep back in time, are any other elemental magics as varied in practitioners? So my take is that although we like to kind of break it down into elements, that's not really how George R. R. Martin has done this. He's not said, well, here's some earth magic, here's some air magic, here's some fire magic, here's some water magic. It's just that there are some bits of magic which are quite watery, and there are some bits of magic which are quite fiery, and so on. We haven't got an air type of magic. This is one of the reasons why you can see he's not done this, is we've not got an air type of magic. We've got lots of people doing fire, but they seem to be doing it in different ways. To take fire, for example, you've obviously got the Priests of R'hllor, who've got some sort of fire magic. They can see things in the flames. You've got Dany, who's doing some sort of fire magic, bringing dragons to life. We've got fire magicians in Karth, who we hear about. There are lots of different types of fire magic, but they all seem to be different types. So I don't subscribe to the idea that they're by elements. I think there is just magic is there, and you can access this magic in different ways. Now, the to answer your question about the water magic, yes, there's a huge amount of variety of that, and that's it's clearly very different. So we do get the ground god stuff, which does seem to potentially bring people back from life. It is, yes, it's a sort of a CPR kind of thing, but there's a hint of some kind of magic going on there. The Roinar definitely had some kind of water magic going on. There certainly seems to be some sort of water magic going on with Patchface. There are lots of different bits of magic, but you would not say that they are connected. And the Hammer of the Waters, is that water magic, or is that just magic that happens to involve some water? That's where I come from. So I don't think that we break this down by elements. I think that George R. Martin just has different types of magic that can happen in different ways. Okay, let's go to last question from one of my patrons. So if you've got any more questions in the chat, now is a good time to drop them in there. Creative Branches saying Danny's burning of the temple of the Dosh Coleen on the show was so poetic and subtly foreshadowed, it made me consider if it was one of George's WTF moments, which he told the showrunners. I know it is rarely considered one of them. Do you think something very different might happen in the books? So this was, for those who don't know, back in, I don't even know which year it was, but between seasons 4 and 5, George R. R. Martin took a step back from Game of Thrones, and he had been writing an episode per season for the first 4 seasons, but he took a step back and said, no, I really want to focus in on writing The Winds of Winter. I think I can finish it soon. And he did a handover meeting which took a few days, apparently, with Dan and Dave, the showrunners. And he told them, he outlined where he thought his story was going. And as a part of that, the showrunners came out and said that he told them 3 what they considered to be the WTF moments. These were things they had not been expecting, things which blew them away. Now, we have, and so we then, I'll put a little asterisk to this, which we'll come back to this, whether we still can take them as pretty clear in canon of what is going to happen in the books. But the 3 things that they said, the first 2 they have confirmed. The hold the door moment, the Shireen being burned moment, and then the 3rd was in season 8. And they've never fully confirmed this, but it seems that this was the Bran becoming king thing, or possibly Jon killing Daenerys. Now, but it was definitely a season 8 moment, because they said that they'd had the 2 and they've got 1 more to come. So I think it's very clear that that was not one of those 3 moments that they were referring to. Now, I certainly held at the time, which I think was fair, that this meant that we could then lock in those things and say those things are happening in the books. I do not think that that's necessarily the case anymore. I think it's very likely still. I think it's very likely that we're going to have Shireen burned. I think it's very likely we're going to have the hold the door moment, because that has been built up right from the beginning. And I think, I don't know whether I'd say it's very likely, but likely that we'll end up with Bran as king. Now, what we can't do now is say that they're locked in, because George R. R. Martin has emphasized quite a lot recently how since then he's changed some of his story. So this isn't in reaction to what happened with Game of Thrones, or at least he's not said that it's in reaction to what happened with Game of Thrones. It's just that he's a gardener writer, and as he writes, things just branch off, and he just follows his muse. So they may not happen like that. As for this burning of the Dosh Coleen, I think that is close to being locked in as much as there's stuff that happens in Dany's visions in the House of the Undying, which very clearly seem to echo it. I think that she will clearly have to escape from the Dothraki, and I think she probably, to bring her story with them full circle, she will have to become their leader in some way. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that she will do it. I don't think it will happen in exactly the same way, but I've got a working theory that Dany has to light 3 fires on her own. We're told this in the House of the Undying. You will light 3 fires. The first one she has already, Drogo's pyre. I don't think anyone doubts that that's what that is. There are lots of other things that she burns with the dragons, but that's not her personally. And I think this will be the second one. I think that she will personally burn the Face Dothrak, basically. Now, it might be more than just that one hut. That was what happened on the show. I think that it will be a lot bigger than that. I think it will be a lot more impressive than that. But I think that she will kill the Carls, and I think that the Dosh Coleen will accept her as being the leader, the Khaleesi. Okay, so I think it. So in summary on that one, I think it will happen, but probably in a bigger, more impressive way in the books. Let's go into the chat. Nigel Milliken saying, just want to say that I ship the hell out of Duncan Rohan. Here's to hoping they reunite at some point. Yeah, this is some Duncan Eggtails, which I'm hopeful after we get the Winds of Winter, we will get 1 or 2 more of them. I do too, actually. Although, I mean, I want him to end up with someone. Whether he will be able to as a member of the Kingsguard, I don't know. But maybe Tansy Tootle, I quite like. He certainly seems to be looking for her. So, yeah, Rohan, we know, will actually end up marrying a Lannister, but then running away mysteriously, which I think is almost certainly something we're going to have a Duncan Egg story about, because they are going to go around the 7 kingdoms in these stories. We've been exploring down into the Reach and Dawn and places like that. We're heading up to the north next. I think we will have to go to the Westlands at some point. Andrew K saying the prophecy seems to be related to defeating the others as its end game. The post-others governance or ending seems not as relevant or connected. Yep. Carl Carsnark saying kill the Carls, not the Carl Carsnarks, no. Mike S saying, how much do you think Visenya was jealous of Rhaenys? It sort of shows to Aegon's character that he loved the nice sister that wasn't so conniving. I don't see any evidence that she was jealous of her. There's no, I mean, she might have been, but I don't think that we've got any evidence of it. Curtis Frank saying Dunk has game. The seed is strong with a capital S. I see what you did there. Aaron G saying, will Dany need to take all of the 7 kingdoms by force like Aegon did, or just capturing King's Landing will be enough? Well, Dany will want to take all of the 7 kingdoms. When it's saying, will it be enough? I think enough for what is the question. And Mike S saying, in your opinion, if you're in her spot, I think she wants to take it all. Jordan Neeland saying, what is one character from the Song of Ice and Fire universe that would be the most interesting to you if they were gender bent, all other circumstances except physiological differences kept the same? Well, I mean, I would love to see what Cersei would be like as a man. She ponders the idea of, or she even goes as far as saying that she should have been born a man. So I think it would be interesting to see if she were born a man, what she would have been like Jamie. I'm not convinced. I'm really not convinced. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to start drawing this one to a close. We've been going over 3 hours now. We'll be back next week. I've got videos coming out soon. Keep an eye out for other announcements in the channel. I've got lots of stuff coming out for this year. Dreaming big dreams for the year. But we'll be back next week with another live stream about Rhaenys and Visenya. So we'll dig a lot more. A few people were asking about the relationship between the two of them. We'll dig into that a lot more. I'll do a little bit more research in the meantime, and we'll dig into that a lot more, as well as their relationship with Aegon and who they were as people and how they shaped the Seven Kingdoms, because this wasn't just Aegon invading, this was all of them invading. But if you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here will be a link to some more live streams. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to Patreon. Patrons, thank you. I forgot to thank you. I cannot do this without your support. So huge thanks to you. And also, it's a bit late, but moderators, you do amazing work too. If you're in the chat still, please show a little bit of love to the moderators. They are amazing. So thank you. But yeah, so where was it? There is going to be a link to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That's all for this time. Thank you so much. Some really excellent questions this time. I will be back next week. Take care.